closer to home so they're not away from their families for so long. So that's being worked out as we see where the final offers are coming from. Yeah, it'll be within weeks, because we're going to give them credit for what they already know. What if they're former law enforcement, they already have training and certifications that we will honor and look at. They'll still look at testing, they'll still look for drug testing and physical tests and all of that. But we want to make sure that it's an expedited, where we check the box that they have the experience, that it helps us not keep them stalled out in the academy for weeks. I'm sure.
Feel like we're still on target, not an arrest that would like in those sanctuary areas.
Well, the lack of information sharing is hard. I would say anybody who serves in law enforcement would say they're used to partners. They're used to being able to call up a local law enforcement officer, a sheriff, a highway patrol officer, and say, hey, do you have any information on this individual that is a murderer that's been cited in your city? That's not happening in Illinois. And when we're calling on those most dangerous individuals, when they're being released from your prisons, they're not even letting us know, not honoring our detainers. When we lodge a detainer against someone, it's when you let that person out of jail who's been paying the consequences, let us know so that we can pick them up and get them out of the country. Illinois is not partnering with us on that, which is very, very difficult when we know that those dangerous criminals are going to run free.
Hello, this is Dr. Paul Cottrell, and we're going to be going over the news today, primarily what's going on with the negotiations between Trump and Putin. Supposedly next week, there's going to be a meeting in Alaska, so we're going to go over some of the commentary about that and my opinion about it. There was also a shooting in Times Square. 3 people are injured. I'm waiting for that to cycle in with Live Now to get a little bit of an update on what is happening in Times Square. But thank you for joining. We're live streaming on YouTube, and we are simulcasting on X Spaces. You can also watch the live stream on my website, the-studio-reykjavik.com. Please help support my work by making sure you subscribe to all my channels. I have 4 channels on YouTube. I have Brighteon, Bitchute, and Rumble. You can also listen to my podcast audio version on my website under broadcast, radio, or on Podomatic and on Apple Podcast. So there are many modalities that you can listen to the work that I do. If you like to support the work, please go to my website, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and you can donate through Stripe, PayPal, or buy me a coffee, or be a paid member to my Patreon channel. All these videos are for free. I don't put stuff behind a paywall. If you'd like to purchase some of the products that I offer on my website, please do. I have ebooks, I have supplements. I'm going to go over throughout this broadcast about how to stack these supplements to get the max benefit. Now, people out there need to understand that if you stack these types of supplements in a certain way, you're going to get more bang for your buck. In addition, I have two modules that you can learn about pulmonology and immunology for only $50. You get lots of videos, lots of PDFs, and learn a lot about how the body works. So that's a great way to help support the work, and you learn about how the human body performs. So if you're an international viewer and you can't buy the products, the supplements that I offer, then you can help support by sharing the links, asking your social media to follow me, and you can donate. So those are many ways for you to support my work. Sharing the links, asking your social media to follow, buying the products. I want you to get healthy in 2025, all right? This stuff works. All you gotta do is just purchase and follow the protocol. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. With that said, I want to go to what's going on with Trump right now. So, all right, so CNN is talking about this summit that's going to happen, or negotiations in Alaska. So let's just listen into what CNN just published 21 minutes ago.
Build anything just by thinking about it. Meet Base 44, a complete AI creation platform made for anyone with an idea.
Vladimir Putin in Alaska on Friday, and now we may have an idea as to the terms that could be discussed in that meeting. He told reporters yesterday it could involve a land swap. Listen.
It's very complicated, but we're going to get some back, and we're going to get some switched. There'll be some swapping of territories to the betterment of both.
But Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is already turning down that idea. He says he is ready to work with Trump, but says his people will not give up their land.
Yeah.
We are ready to work together with President Trump, together with all our partners, for a real and, most importantly, a lasting peace. A peace that will not fall apart because of Moscow's wishes.
CNN's Nick Payton-Walsh joins us now from Kyiv. Nick, is any deal that involves a trading of territories even possible here?
Yeah, I mean, it depends really what Ukraine can expect to get back from this. And it's always been a red line for President Zelensky to not cede territory to Russia without Russia forcibly occupying it. Obviously, Ukraine was invaded, and so for the thousands of Ukrainians who have died, their families, the public sentiment here, simply giving Russia land in exchange for a ceasefire, no matter how long that may last, is politically toxic as an idea, and also unwise, frankly, given that Russia has a history of violating the ceasefires it's agreed to. How a land swap would even work, I struggle to think what it is that Russia currently occupies that it would be willing to give back to Ukraine. There are slivers of land north of Sumy, to the east of Kharkiv, northeast of Kharkiv, which are occupied by Russia in the border areas. Putin calling them a buffer zone. Maybe they could pull out of those areas, but they're comparatively tiny to the huge swathes of land that appear to be in Russia's sights that it wants Kiev to just give to them without a fight. That would include two towns in the Donetsk region, Pokrovsk and Konstantinivka, that are close to being encircled by Russia's summer offensive. Still some way off, but they're closing the net there certainly. And then other towns north of that, Kramatorsk, Slovyansk, Dobropilya, under pressure, but also too heavily full of Ukrainian civilians at this time. So you're essentially asking Zelensky to agree to a frankly horrific moment for Ukraine, where tens of thousands of civilians and soldiers will have to up sticks from these towns and move out to hand them over to the Russians without a fight. Politically impalatable, frankly. So yes, this is going to be a very complex move, if indeed the Donetsk and Luhansk regions are all that Russia actually says it wants. There may be wider demands, indeed. The maximalist position of Putin has been to demilitarize, what he called denazify Ukraine. It's playing to a false narrative of far-right extremists being involved in the government here. And then also large areas of Kherson and Zaporizhia regions he appears to also want too. So it's important to remember that what we're seeing in Alaska on Friday is a Russian president getting a formal invitation to come to the United States, Putin's first visit in a decade, the first president of Russia to visit Alaska, bought from Russia by the United States in 1867, and indeed their terms, it seems, being discussed prior to this particular meeting. Ukraine out of the picture, and the concern, I think, being that we will now have some kind of deal hatched between Washington and Moscow that ends up being presented here to Kiev, with the sort of ultimate past months of threats hanging over.
Nick Payton-Walsh in Kyiv with that context. Thank you very much. Joining me now for analysis is CNN contributor and former CNN Moscow bureau chief, Jill Doherty. Jill, good morning. Thank you for being with us. Let's start with the significance of this meeting happening on American soil. We were talking about, or at least the Russians, a specific quote from Putin was that the UAE would have been perfect. We knew Europe likely wasn't going to be a point of meeting because of the threat that Putin faces from the ICC. But were you surprised at all to know that this was happening in Alaska, American soil?
Yes, definitely. Just the mere fact that
We're going to pause the CNN and we're going to go to live now about the Times Square shooting that took place last night.
Police, though, the 17-year-old suspect is now in custody. Charges, though, have not been pressed at this hour. It has not been made public by police. Now, we've been continuing to keep a very close eye on the New York Police Department social media sites and also New York City Mayor Eric Adams' social media pages. Right now, they don't have any update, but the very latest is there are 3 victims after an early morning shooting in Times Square. 3 people, an 18-year-old female, a 19-year-old male, and a 65-year-old man, all taken to the hospital. A 17-year-old suspect now in custody. Police have not yet identified the suspect or the victims. Also did not divulge the nature of any relationship between them, and no known motive at this hour. We are going to make sure that we stay on top of it and, of course, bring you any updates should they happen, as we are continuing to follow very closely the New York Police Department's social media pages and, of course, our Fox 5 New York team there as well. We now transition to some developing story this morning, and that takes us out to Atlanta, Georgia, where we now know the name of the officer killed in the Emory University active shooter situation yesterday. The very latest from our Fox 5 Atlanta team.
Now, there just seems to have been the last week, or maybe a little bit more, many of these kinds of shootings. It's starting at, let's say, when that shooter drove across the country and went to New York and tried to find some of the executives for the NFL, and he ended up shooting an executive from BlackRock or Blackstone. Is it BlackRock or Blackstone? I think it's Blackstone. And you have the Emory issue, you have you have Times Square issue, so it just seems like there's a lot of these. Oh, you have the military base that happened just a couple days ago. What's going on here? I mean, I have a hard time believing that it's just all random events. It's just like there's something unraveling in society here, all right, that's causing more disruption, more chaos, more anxiety. Is it all these vectors of maybe financial stress, maybe job prospects because of AI? There's a boiling of society that's taking place that's leading to more of these catastrophic events that are taking place right now. Okay, so let's transition back to CNN, them talking about Alaska being the summit for the peace agreement.
American president is inviting the Russian president onto U.S. soil. And remember, even though the U.S. doesn't recognize the International Criminal Court, really the United States has up to this point isolated Russia, isolated Putin. And then, I think it is a very big deal to say, welcome to Alaska. And then, as Nick mentioned, there's a lot of history here that Alaska used to be part of Russia until the United States bought it. And at this moment, there are nationalists in Russia saying, we want it back. So I think there's a lot going on. I would say there's a new wrinkle, though. The Russians now are saying that maybe because all of this is so complicated, we need a second summit. The first one hasn't even taken place. Now they're talking about another one in Moscow. And they're also talking about what I would say is kind of luring President Trump with the idea that the Arctic.
Now, remember what I said about Trump, and I said this a long time ago, years ago, all right? Trump has a soul root that is similar to George Washington, similar to JFK, and also to Reagan, all right? He's not 100% of any one of them, but there are elements of Trump that you can see that Reagan had, or JFK had, or Washington had, George Washington. So in terms of going back to the whole Cold War and the negotiations with Reagan and Gorbachev, this is like, Back to the Future kind of thing that's going on here. very, very, very reminiscent of Reykjavik and Gorbachev with Reagan.
Of course, up near Alaska, that the Arctic is a place that could be developed and there could be all sorts of deals. So I think Putin is now pretty skillfully trying to raise that idea that, yeah, relationship back on track, we can work together, we can have deals, etc. It's a really an amazingly complex and fascinating moment.
Yeah, you couldn't miss the number of times that the Russian side mentioned the Arctic in their statement, clearly giving their hand here as to what negotiations will go with, what subjects they'll be bringing up. Let me ask you this. Now, Trump said that a potential peace deal would include swapping of territories between Russia and Ukraine. We've heard Zelensky say, no way, we are not giving up land. That's a whole separate question. But what would that mean if the U.S. officially recognizes territory that Russia conquered from a sovereign nation by force?
Well, it would mean that the United States is saying that it is okay to take some other country's land, invade them, take them over, and it will be recognized legally. I mean, here's where we get into the weeds on this, because, it's one thing to conquer territory, etc.
Might makes right, and war. If you can take land in a war and maintain it, and you have negotiating pieces for allowing the international community to accept it, and you get integrated into the economy again, then it basically just happened. All right. Chunks of Ukraine are going to be going to Russia. That's a foregone conclusion. Now the question is, which chunks of Ukraine?
But for the United States to legally recognize that, now this is Russia's soil, that is a very big deal. And it really blesses the ability for a country, in theory, for a country to take over another country. And, the United States up to this point has not done that. There were areas like the Baltics after, that were taken over by Russia, by the Soviet Union. And the United States de facto said, yeah, that's what's happening, and we have to deal with the Soviet Union, but we don't recognize it. So these are the really complex and very important sticking points that could emerge and that are emerging.
Well, let me ask about the elephant in the room, or rather what's missing, and that's Ukraine. Trump has said he eventually wants a trilateral meeting that involves the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. And we know that this idea was floated by Steve Witkoff, Trump's White House envoy, during his August 6th meeting with Putin. And he's been there 5 times already this year. But the Russians have so far shrugged off that idea. Why would Putin be so reluctant to meet Zelensky directly?
Oh, there are a number of reasons,
They hate
but I
each
think
other.
that, a couple major ones. If Putin sits down with,
They absolutely hate each other. All it's going to do is end up into a shouting match. If Zelensky had a shouting match in the Oval Office with Trump, can you just imagine what it would be with Putin? They need a mediator. There's no way that those two in a room by themselves. I don't think that's a good idea.
landscape. It is recognizing him as the leader of another country. And Putin, number one, doesn't consider Ukraine an independent sovereign nation. And he certainly doesn't consider Zelensky a legal president. And the Russians explain that by saying, he's been in power even after he was supposed to leave power, because he has never been re-elected. Now, according to the Constitution and according to what's happening in Ukraine, they have martial law right now. So according to martial law, you can't have an election. But so the Russians are saying he's not even legitimate. And I think also it's just the desire by Putin to leave Zelensky kind of hanging there as this rogue figure, because in the future, if this goes the way Putin wants, he wants to replace Zelensky with a Russia-friendly leader. That's all part of what Putin is looking at in the not so distant future.
Jill Doherty, a complicated topic that you simplify for our audience. Appreciate your time as always.
Thanks, Isabel.
Thanks.
Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and help support the work that I do. All these videos are for free. And I want you to get those supplements, stack them the way I'm telling you to, so you can get healthy in 2025 and in 2026, 2027. It's really important to improve your health. And if everyone's doing that in the United States, if everyone is looking in the mirror and saying, what can they do to improve their health? And they take charge of their health and wellness, then healthcare costs will go down. That's the most effective way to bring down healthcare costs in the United States, is for people to take charge of their own health and to do early screenings and to catch issues early. So a great supplement to get is Myotrol. Myotrol is great for individuals that are 40 years of age or older. Myotrol helps with the gene expression to build muscle and to maintain muscle and to help with the mitochondrial health, so you have the ATP to build that muscle and to maintain that muscle. Most people, when they get into their 40s, start to atrophy, males and females. So this supplement will help you to build muscle. Do some resistance training. You don't have to be a bodybuilder, but do some resistance training, take Myotrol, and you will be gaining muscle. This stacks really well with Gladiator Barley and also Boomer Boost. Myotrol has polyphenols, lignans, and flavonoids to help with the gene expression to help build that muscle and to maintain that muscle. Atrophy is a major problem when you are in your 40s. And if you don't try to reverse it, it's going to cause problems later in your geriatric years. So it's really important to take Myotrol. Now, if you're an athlete, younger or older, you will benefit from Myotrol, especially if you stack it with Gladiator Barley and Boomer Boost. And you use that as your pre-workout and your post-workout fueling. Another great supplement that I have that's dual purpose is olive leaf extract. Olive leaf extract helps to boost up your immune system, and olive leaf extract helps to improve your cardiovascular health. Now, it brings down inflammation, and it helps to bring down LDL levels and increase your HDL levels, so you're improving your total cholesterol. When you do that, you're reducing the chances of plaque buildup, because plaque buildup is based on inflammation, free radicals that are oxidizing LDL. Those macrophages eat those oxidized LDL and then turns into a foam cell and then creates plaque. Well, if you can reduce that inflammation and reduce the actual poor cholesterol, the bad cholesterol, you're reducing the chances of oxidized LDL and reducing the chances of plaque buildup. Very important. So please go to my store and get the olive leaf extract. Another great supplement that I have is Clarity Factor. Clarity Factor helps to get rid of that brain fog, and it helps to support memory. Now, by taking Clarity Factor, you're going to be able to concentrate on tasks at work or at school, or even if you're retired and you need to allow you to concentrate. What it does over time is it's going to help to improve the dendritic connections between neurons. And the more dendritic connections that you have, the faster you're going to think, the better your memory will be. Drink it with filtered water, take it every day, and you're going to be improving that neuroplasticity. Your memory is going to improve, and you're going to be able to concentrate. Super important supplement to take. And last, vitamin B complex. If you're 40 years of age or older, you need to rev up that metabolism, because normally what happens when for males and females, your metabolism starts to wane. And when that happens is that your mitochondrial health starts to decline. You start to increase your free radicals, more stress in the cell starts to happen, tissues start to degrade, your neurons start to be less robust, the myelin sheath starts to degrade, that neuroplasticity turns negative, where you have less connections, you have less dendritic connections. So what you want to do is you want to reverse that in the aging process. So you want to rev up that metabolism. You want to increase those energy levels. You want to improve the health of those neurons. You want to, that mitochondrial health is super important. Bring down those free radicals. Now with vitamin B complex, the first 4 B vitamins helps with the electron transport chain within the mitochondria. The mitochondria is the major energy source for your cell. It'll build up those ATP levels that you need. So if you have healthy mitochondria like you were in your 20s, then your body is going to perform better because it'll have more energy. So vitamin B complex, super important. It revs up that cellular metabolism, and the B12 vitamin helps to protect your neurons. Now, many people don't realize, but because of the crisis that we went through in 2020, there's an aftershock. Part of that aftershock is immune system issues. Part of it is autoimmune problems. Another part is higher incidences of cancers and early onset of dementia. You will see within 5 years, many people within your social circle developing signs of early onset of dementia. You can mitigate this, but if you don't listen to me, you are increasing the probability of having these issues. Now, it's a holistic approach. This is the only way you're going to be able to mitigate this. And that is proper diet, stay away from processed foods, stay away from unfiltered water. You want to drink filtered water. Stay away from those processed foods. Use the 4 modalities of exercise, which are resistance training, cardiovascular fitness, increase your cardiovascular fitness, balancing, and stretching. Those 4 modalities will help not just your overall body, but also your brain. There's 2 sections, 2 ways to look at brain function: cognitive and motor. Now, with the motor, by balancing and stretching and doing the resistance training, you're helping your kinematics and activating the cerebellum. When you're doing that on a regular basis, you're improving body coordination and reducing gait issues. Like I said, in 5 years, you're going to start seeing a lot of people having problems with neurological issues. All right? Some of those individuals are going to have gait issues, walking, balancing problems. Some people are going to have eye issues or hearing issues. Others are going to have issues with their cognitive function. So by taking supplements that protect the neurons and you're stimulating those neurons, you're helping both paths. You're helping the cognitive path and you're helping the motor path. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the vitamin B complex. It boosts up those energy levels, helps with the cellular metabolism, and it helps to protect the neuron. Clarity factor helps with the memory and helps with the dendritic connections. The olive leaf extract helps with your immune system and your cardiovascular system. And the myotrol will help to build muscle and maintain muscle. So if you do this in a holistic way, you're going to have your body more robust as you get older. All right. For ones that don't do this, you're going to see many of your family members or friends, co-workers, you're going to start seeing them having sentence creation issues, being able to finish a conversation cogently. You're going to start seeing that individuals are going to have stuttering problems, gait issues. So beware. Early onset of dementia is coming. It's coming. It's already here, actually. But some people haven't really seen it yet in their little social network. But if you have a larger social network, you have a larger network, of people or coworkers, you're starting to see it already. All right, with that, please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. Get the supplements, use discount 5. You get $5 off any order. And if you spend $100 or more, I give you a free gift. Let's listen to Sky News here.
If I disappeared for 3 months, nobody would notice. My AI employees would keep posting, emailing, and selling. You think I'm lucky? I'm not. I'm just sick and tired of
So Mark, a very good afternoon. Let's start, if we can, on Ukraine. What's your sense here of what President Trump is trying to achieve in regards to this meeting with Vladimir Putin next week? I mean, he wants to bring the war to an end. Do you think he's expecting to be able to do that next week?
No.
Well, I think he would like to actually be able to announce a deal next Friday and say, look, I've agreed how to end this war, and then present that.
Putin is playing Trump. Now, it would be wonderful if there was going to be some sort of peace. But Putin is going to go along with Trump to a certain extent. And Putin knows that Zelensky is going to have a shit fit because he doesn't want to give up any land. And therefore, the deal is going to fall apart. So Putin is just buying time. And Trump, basically wasted time. And what's going to end up happening is there are going to need to be further sanctions on Russia and most likely military support by the United States and Europe to help bolster up Ukraine. That's how I think it's all going to play out.
To President Zelensky, I think myself that's unlikely to happen. The Russians are certainly saying it's a complicated process and it's a challenging one, and it'll take some time. And I'm sure that is absolutely correct, because the worst thing for Ukraine certainly would be some down and dirty deal between Trump and Putin that is then presented to Zelensky as a fait accompli.
Isn't what President Putin is trying to do here is, yes, get a form of legitimacy with the meeting in Alaska, but do what he's, let's be honest about this, done quite successfully so far this year since President Trump got into the office, and it's just to buy himself more time to drag this process out.
Absolutely. I mean, the Russians have strung Steve Witkoff and Donald Trump along for 7 months very successfully while they prosecute the war on the battlefield. And I'm sure the Russians see this meeting as, in a sense, a reward for them, because they'll want to talk not just about Ukraine, but also about the bilateral relations, economic potential, the frozen north, etc. And will present this as a sort of end of Putin's isolation in the West. So for them, the meeting is already a success. They will want to string it along. They'll probably maintain their maximalist demands as long as they can. And it'll be interesting to see how President Trump responds to that.
And so, Mark, what's interesting today also is we've had that phone call between President Zelensky and Sir Keir Starmer in the last couple of hours. And it's pretty clear, not just that effectively Ukraine doesn't want to be cut out of any deal, but that Europe wants to be part of this process too and is trying to make itself relevant.
Absolutely. And there's going to be a meeting, I think, of national security advisors, and they will be working up a message together with the Americans to make sure that this meeting on Friday isn't what we all fear, which is isolating Zelensky and then blaming Zelensky for not accepting an unacceptable deal that struck between Putin and Trump. Because although Trump is already talking about land swaps, well, that's a real problem for Zelensky because it's unconstitutional to give away land in the first place. And also, of course, Ukraine does not occupy any Russian land at the moment. So really, the land swaps are rewarding Putin for his aggression. And also, there's the bigger question in some ways in the longer term is how is any ceasefire that's announced going to be sustainable without proper security guarantees for Ukraine going forward? And those proper security guarantees have got to include NATO and the United States.
I always find it interesting when you're watching the news, the serendipitousness of certain events. So Israel taking over Gaza City and Putin creating the environment of keeping the land that he took over during the war. So there's always, I've been saying that there's a connection between, not necessarily geopolitical, but more spiritual or metaphysical. Maybe metaphysical is the better term, between what's going on in Ukraine and the Ukrainian war and what's going on with Israel and the Palestinian conflict. They're together. There's a metaphysical connection between the two.
And so far, the Americans haven't shown any willingness to offer those guarantees to Zelensky.
But just on trying to remain relevant, and these talks are going to be hosted by JD Vance and indeed by David Lammy. But at the end of the day, does that really matter when we know ultimately it'll be down to what Donald Trump wants to do in any given moment?
Well, of course, that is true, Darren, but we do have influence with the Americans. And when we're talking together with the Europeans as well, that has some impact. As you've seen, Keir Starmer's getting on pretty well with Donald Trump. And you've had the JD Vance, the David Lammy sort of bromance going on as well. So, we are close allies of America and they do respect our views. So I don't want to suggest we don't have any influence. The difficulty is that we know that President Trump is inclined to sort of listen to the last person he spoke to. And if he's isolated with President Putin in Alaska, there is a risk that President Putin will roll him over.
Yeah, maybe he needs to bring Melania along as well. We're told that she's pretty influential there these days. So can we just turn also to, obviously, the other big story this week, and that is Gaza and Israel. And interestingly, a real divergence, I would now suggest, between Germany, France, the UK, and its ally Israel.
Yes, I think the Western allies, including Germany, who, let's bear in mind, Germany didn't go along with Britain, France, and Canada in saying that they wanted to recognize a Palestinian state. They've always been very stalwart supporters of Israel. They're the second largest defense suppliers to Israel, for obvious historical reasons. And so for them to join in this condemnation or criticism of what is being announced by the Security Cabinet, I think is very significant. It just emphasizes the fact what a big military and political gamble this is on the part of Netanyahu.
And that's the question, I suppose. Is it a gamble, though? Because isn't the calculation, clearly he wants to remain in power. I mean, I think his political opponents in Israel would certainly accuse him of that, but some of his political allies would as well. But ultimately, again, it comes back to Donald Trump. And as long as America's provided and willing to provide that support, does it really matter to Mr. Netanyahu what the UK, Germany, France and others think?
Probably not.
Well, at the end of the day, probably not. But it is a massive political gamble on his part because, already nearly 1,000 IDF soldiers have died in this campaign, and a lot more will probably die if they try this sort of urban warfare in Gaza City to eradicate the remains of the Hamas fighters, not to mention the chances that a lot of the hostages that are still alive, the 20 or so, will probably not survive. We shouldn't forget that of the 150 hostages so far released, only 8 were released through military action. All the others were released as a result of a ceasefire and a swap. And that's what the families of the hostages are most worried about. So there's a big military gamble there, but there's a huge political gamble because a majority of Israeli public opinion believes that the best way forward is a ceasefire deal, not intensified military action. So I think there's a lot at stake for Netanyahu, not just the condemnation by traditional allies around the world.
Just very funny on that, Tamar. I mean, we seem further away from a deal than ever before. The Israelis are saying, and the Americans accused Hamas of simply not wanting one. Where is the pathway now, do you think, for a political deal? Many have suggested, by the way, of course, the announcement of this incursion into, or this occupation of Gaza is actually essentially a tactic by the Israelis to try and force Hamas back around the table again.
Yes, it might be that, and the fact that it's quite a long, drawn-out process. They're talking about evacuation up to the symbolic date of October the 7th, before any military action starts, does suggest that they're giving Hamas a last opportunity to come to the table. Indeed, that's what some of the right-wing members of Netanyahu's cabinet are concerned about, like Smotrich and his party. So that might be a tactic and it might be successful, but I have to say, I find it difficult to see how this will end well in either way, because Hamas are not going to agree to give up the hostages when they know that as soon as they do, the Israeli full military might will be imposed upon them. And so a further chance of having a peaceful resolution seems to me to be very remote indeed. And all the time, the sort of prospect of a two-state solution disappears over the horizon. So I can't say that I'm optimistic about a sustainable peace in the Middle East region.
Okay, so Mark, we really appreciate your time, and
All right, we're going to be going to a video about the military-industrial complex for the United States by Al Jazeera. I haven't seen the video, so it'll be interesting to watch. And it probably couples well with what's going on with the United States and their stance with the Middle East and their stance with Europe. For the ones that don't know, on my website, I have many different supplements. I have lots of different supplements. You can buy the supplements individually, or you can buy them through the anti-aging boxes that I have in the longevity boxes. I have two types. I have the anti-aging boxes and the longevity boxes. The anti-aging and the longevity boxes are priced at a discount. It's curated with certain types of supplements, right? So you can purchase a box, or you can purchase the supplements individually and customize the stack whichever way you want. So make sure you use discount 5 and you get $5 off any order. If you spend $100 or more, you do get a free gift. Now let's talk about another great supplement that you should take that helps to detoxify your body. Zeolite. Zeolite is a great way to get rid of heavy metals, toxins, and chemicals, including forever chemicals. All right, the PFAS. Now, another thing that you need to do when you're detoxifying your body is you also have to detoxify your environment. And you do that by making sure you filter your water, make sure you stay away from processed foods, stay away from chemical sprays, especially on the lawn, and chemicals that are in your household, detergents, paints, bug sprays, whatever you might have in your garage or in your basement or in your closet. These things you might want to get rid of. Now, if some of them you absolutely need, then put them in a double layered container. So you can get from like Container Store these containers that are plastic, and you can put these items in the container, and then you get a bigger container to put that container in. And so it's double layered. And by doing that, you're reducing the chances of outgassing. A lot of people don't realize that, you store the stuff in your garage or in your basement or in your cupboard, and you're actually breathing in slowly small concentrations of this. These chemicals affect your immune system and your endocrine system. So you want to detoxify your environment, but you also want to detoxify your body. Now, to detoxify your body, taking the zeolite every day, use 3 small drops underneath your tongue and drink the filtered water. Now, what it'll do is it'll bind to the heavy metals, toxins, and chemicals, including the forever chemicals. And what will happen is that it'll allow you to urinate them out within 6 to 8 hours. You detoxify your body on a regular basis and you reduce the ingestion of these chemicals. Over time, what's going to happen is your body is going to go into homeostasis. And your immune system will be more robust, your endocrine system will be more robust, and you'll age slower. And your body will just be more robust if you come in contact with something where your body has to fight. So taking zeolite every day is what I recommend. Now, some people prefer a heavier detox. To do that, you take 10 small drops underneath your tongue, drink the filtered water, do that every day until the bottle is done, and do that once or twice a year. But it's better to just clean your environment, do a maintenance detox, and you're covering the whole range of the year. So please go to my store and get the zeolite. Detoxify your body. And a great supplement to help with your brain function is taking magnesium and zinc. But magnesium and zinc also helps with your immune system. So this is a dual purpose supplement. It's gonna help with your immune system and your brain function. Now, like I said, a lot of people are gonna have this issue with early onset of dementia if you don't pay attention. So you have to do this holistic approach: proper diet, proper exercise, proper sleep, proper supplementation. Magnesium also increases the efficacy of vitamin D3. So taking magnesium and zinc, very important. Go to my store, use discount 5 on any order. You get $5 off. If you spend $100 or more, you get a free gift. All right, let's go to this Al Jazeera video about how the military industrial complex captured US.
October 2023, 2 weeks into the Gaza genocide, one of the world's largest weapons companies, General Dynamics, is holding its quarterly call with investors.
Israel, Hamas, additional demand. We have another $6 billion request from the president. Can you give us some general color in terms of areas where you think you could see incremental acceleration in demand?
The forecast for the American corporation is looking good.
The Israel situation obviously is a terrible one, frankly, but I think if you look at the incremental demand potential coming out of that, the biggest one to highlight and really sticks out is probably on the artillery side.
In other words, more conflict means greater profits, and there's never been a better time to be in the business of war. Around the globe, conflict is on the rise, and the weapons fueling it are deadlier and more destructive than ever. Over the past 10 years, I've reported on how these tools of war destroy lives and communities. Arms companies say they're merely responding to a surging demand for their products, but that's not the full story. In this episode, the US weapons industry, the largest of them all, in Gaza and beyond, what impact is it having on our world?
Since October 7th, the United States has sent all types of military aid to Israel, and bunker buster bombs have been a substantial portion of US military aid. And we know that Israel has used these to decimate Gaza. One is the BLU-109, which is manufactured by General Dynamics. These bombs are designed to explode after they penetrate hardened targets, like underground facilities or fortified concrete buildings. And so Israel has used bunker buster bombs to destroy residential areas by hitting concrete buildings from the top all the way to the foundation of the building.
Weighing 2,000 pounds, the BLU-109 and its sister weapon, the Mark 84, are some of the largest bombs on the market. Since the bombing started, the US has sent to Israel more than 15,000 of them. Their explosive power means they can kill people hundreds of meters from the point of impact. In Gaza, one of the most densely populated places on Earth, Israel has repeatedly used 2,000-pound bombs in areas that it forced civilians to move to, like the tent encampment in El Mawasi in 2024, and on medical facilities like the European Hospital in May 2025. Ed Brown is a British vascular surgeon. As a volunteer in Gaza, he treated victims from both attacks.
The attacks on Al Mawasi and the European Hospital, distinguished by the huge volume of casualties, but also by the severity of the injuries. Anyone within the blast radius of an airstrike like this is at risk of death from both the force of the explosion, which can cause very severe internal injuries and external injuries. Of course, civilians to be thrown long distances, to have limbs ripped off, to have severe internal injuries which could cause instant death. And then, as well as the initial blast, anything nearby gets sucked through what's called the blast wind. Masonry, glass, dirt gets picked up and causes severe injuries to the body, because there are so many displaced people in Gaza living in such small, cramped conditions in makeshift tents and what is supposed to be a humanitarian zone. There's no doubt that a great number of people will be killed or injured by an explosion like this.
For all the devastation US weapons have caused in Gaza, in the context of the US war industry, they're a drop in the ocean. More than 40% of all weapons sold worldwide come from US companies. That trade is dominated by the so-called Big Five US firms, which are also the 5 largest in the world. Since the start of the conflicts in Gaza and Ukraine, their revenues have soared, but selling weapons overseas is only part of their business. At home, they enjoy an almost guaranteed windfall every year, from a US military budget worth roughly $1 trillion, more than half of Washington's entire federal budget. In US politics, money means influence, and warnings of the war industry's potential to corrupt American democracy go back decades. In 1961, Republican President Dwight Eisenhower used his farewell address to alert his fellow citizens of this new danger and coined a new phrase to describe it: the military-industrial complex.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes.
When he delivered his remarks, it was the first time that the U.S. had decided on, after war, to not demobilize. It drew down troops slightly after the Korean War, but it kept its war industry going, kept its arms industry going. The government specifically subsidized the creation of a dedicated arms industry that would be permanent. So Eisenhower's concern was that the country's war machine would effectively become sentient and realize that their existence and their growth depends on war and wartime levels of military spending, and that they would fight and manipulate the political system, the social system, the economy to achieve those ends.
The main difference between the military establishment today and in 1961 is that it's much more powerful. Prior to the 1990s, there were dozens of arms contractors that constituted this US military establishment. Now there are 5 prime contractors that take home over half of the DoD budget every single year. That means that they have an incredible amount of power and influence on legislators through campaign donations as well as through lobbying.
But US weapons companies do have an Achilles heel. They rely on Congress to keep up wartime levels of military spending all the time. This is where they use their financial muscle. In the last election cycle, more than 98% of US lawmakers received campaign donations from the arms industry. That's on top of the nearly $150 million these companies spent on lobbying. Here on Capitol Hill, the influence of the arms industry is never far away. You've got the lobbyists, roughly 2 for every elected official. You've got the campaign contributions by these military companies to both Republican and Democratic lawmakers. And then you've got the personal investments. It's all become normalized here, but it raises obvious questions as to whose interests these politicians serve.
Members of Congress are effectively incentivized to vote for military budget increases in the form of campaign contributions from arms manufacturers. So for the past 4 military budgets on the votes, I've compared the average amount of money that members of Congress who vote yes on the military budget, as in, yes, I want to increase military spending, versus the average amount of campaign cash from the arms industry of the members who vote no. In every year, the members who vote yes on the military budget take 4, 5, 6 times more money from arms manufacturers prior to their vote than those who vote no. It's a stunning correlation that you just see every single time.
Another potential obstacle for the war industry comes in the form of congressional committees, which scrutinize legislation worth billions of dollars to US weapons companies. It's on these committees that you'll find the politicians who receive the most in industry donations. A case in point is the Senate Armed Services Committee, which oversees the Department of Defense's yearly budget.
This hearing will come to order. Thank you all for coming.
It's led by Republican Senator Roger Wicker.
Roger Wicker is the chair of the Senate Armed Services Committee. He is also the largest recipient of industry donations in terms of his political campaign. And he is one of the biggest proponents of so-called peace through strength, the sort of Reagan era mantra for the defense buildup. And he has advocated for the United States Congress to increase military spending to 5% of GDP in the next decade or so. This would add literally trillions of dollars to the national security budget.
The United States is up against the most dangerous threat environment we've faced since World War II.
So Roger Wicker is one of the main actors in pushing the national security budget higher and higher. And he is also one who has most vested interest in that happening.
Roger Wicker didn't respond to our requests for an interview. So I went down to the committee he chaired to ask him about allegations of conflict of interest. Mr. Wicker, how are you? Hey, Hassan. I just wanted to ask you, why is it important to increase military budgets, in your opinion?
Released an entire paper about that.
Yeah, I read it actually, but my main question was to ask you, considering you've had hundreds of thousands of dollars of donations from military companies, do you not see that as a conflict of interest being in a committee like this, sir? I have more luck with Democratic Senator Tim Kaine. He sits on the same committee as Roger Wicker and is the second largest recipient of arms industry campaign donations in the US Senate. Do you think there's a conflict of interest? The donations into your campaign. Do you think there's a conflict?
Is not me
But is there a conflict of interest there?
No.
But is there a conflict of interest at all?
Because I get donations, I probably have donations from 150,000 donors run for the Senate. So can I not vote on anything that affects any of them?
Voting for bills that benefit your donors is one thing. What makes it especially controversial is Tim Kaine's role on a committee with the power to influence those donors' profits. The other key body with that authority is the Senate Appropriations.
Let me just interrupt so we can do an advertisement. But the military industrial complex is definitely part of the problem that we have in today's world. Definitely the problem. And it is fascinating if you actually sit and listen to the earnings calls of some of these defense contractors or weapons development manufacturers. Is fascinating to listen to. Now, what's important is that the graphic they were talking about where she said that the revenues are soaring. If you notice, she didn't show the actual revenues that were coming in with the 20-year war within the Middle East. I think she started at 2021 and then showed it up to modern day. But the point I'm making is that when we had the war in the Middle East post 9/11, all right, the defense contractors were making boatloads of money. But as that was starting to wane down, these defense contractors were starting to lose money. Or not lose money, but make less money. Let's put it that way. Make less money. So it was important to understand the ramp up of the cash flows for the defense industry post 9/11 through the Bush era, Bush Jr. era, and then how they started to steadily decline over time. And when they started to steadily decline and then we left Afghanistan, all of a sudden we started a war in Ukraine. Now, the official historical fact is that Putin was the one that invaded Ukraine. But this rumbling of Ukraine with Russia started in 2014. It just so happened to just reach a crescendo, and with that led for more cash flows to go into the military industrial complex, right? So I wish that they showed the full arc of that 25-year 9/11, the ramp up, the ramp down, and then an additional ramp up. And it's not just, of course, it's Al Jazeera. They're going to focus on just the Middle East, but this play with the military-industrial complex are three different theaters. One theater is the European theater, the Middle Eastern theater, and then the ramp up in the Asian theater. But they're too focused on the Middle East section of this. But as those cash flows were starting to come down in the Middle East, it had to go back up for the European theater, for Boeing and Lockheed and General Dynamics.
Which oversees all federal government spending. Its chair is Republican Senator Susan Collins.
Crescendo. Now I finally got it out of my mouth. All right, please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the turmeric. The turmeric helps to bring down inflammation. It's going to soak up free radicals. When you do that, it's going to help with your immune system and your cardiovascular system. Ashwagandha root controls the glucose levels and your cortisol levels. When you have high glucose levels and high cortisol levels, that's immunosuppressive and inflammatory. What will happen is that your vascular system is going to be inflamed and you're increasing the chances of having plaque buildup. You want to bring that down. You want to bring down that inflammation. You want to control your blood glucose levels. You want to control your cortisol levels, because high cortisol levels that are chronic will lead to immunosuppression. So you want to control that. So by taking ashwagandha root, you're helping your immune system and your cardiovascular system. You stack it together with the turmeric, there's a synergistic effect for helping your cardiovascular health and your immune system. Lignans also soaks up free radicals. It's a powder. You mix it with soft foods or with filtered water. I mix it with soft foods. And by taking lignans, it's going to soak up free radicals, so you're bringing down stress, you're improving the health of your mitochondria, you're going to have more ATP. You're bringing down inflammation, so if you work out, you're going to recover from your workout quicker. And bringing down chronic inflammation will help with your immune system, because chronic inflammation is actually immunosuppressive. So if you take these together, you're helping with your cardiovascular health and your immune system. And this is the reason why I keep on telling you, buy the different supplements and stack them accordingly, and you're getting more bang for your buck. All right? Because the whole idea is to have synergy and to target with the stack multiple systems of your body. So get the ashwagandha root, the turmeric, and the lignans. Take it every day. Also, I have very high quality soaps, structural nano silver soaps. You can get it in lemongrass, in charcoal tea tree, lavender, and peppermint. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. Get a few bars of the structural nano silver soaps, very high quality. All right.
Also serves on the subcommittee responsible for the military. She too is a major recipient of campaign donations from the arms industry, but she also has another connection. Her husband owns stocks in 4 weapons firms, including RTX, which produces bunker buster bombs, and Boeing, which makes the guidance systems. That raises the prospect of her family benefiting financially from the increases to military spending that happened under Senator Collins.
So not only do we have a problem in Congress and in the Senate, not only do we have a problem of our representatives being able to trade on information, insider information, and position themselves to profit, but they make decisions that can actually improve their stock positions, especially in military stocks. This is the reason why all members of government should only be able to invest in broad index ETFs or blind trusts. So therefore, their decisions are made for the overall benefit of the country and not their stock portfolio.
She's previously disclosed these holdings, so her reaction when I asked her about them was a little unexpected. I just wanted to ask you about your household shares in military companies, and do you think that's a conflict of interest given your position as the chair of the Appropriations Committee?
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Your household shares in RTX and Boeing?
I don't know what you're talking about.
Basically, there are people who have raised concerns about the fact that your household has shares in yeah, your husband has shares in RTX and Boeing. Is that not something that you know about?
I truly don't know. No, I don't, but my husband's holdings.
You don't know what your husband's holdings are in your household? It's been more reported.
We have separated.
It's been more reported.
I don't understand.
A spokesperson.
So they play the game. Oh, we have separate accounts, so I don't know anything. Really? Really? What about Nancy Pelosi?
Says her husband's investments are managed by an advisor. They are also legal. In fact, an estimated 37 lawmakers or their family members have traded stocks in weapons companies worth up to $113 million. It's one of several incentives for Congress to channel taxpayers' money the industry's way. But for companies with billions of dollars at stake each year, the most important thing is that these lawmakers followed through with legislation. Stephen Semler spends his time documenting the impact and influence of the military-industrial complex, but he used to be an insider as a director for one of the industry's leading lobby firms. You were previously a lobbyist. What did that job entail?
Lobbies are particularly skilled at rescuing dysfunctional programs that don't have any even military utility and should otherwise be killed off. I have an example for you. This is a GAO report, Government Accountability Office. It's recommending to Congress that Congress really shouldn't appropriate or give any more funding to this Littoral Combat Ship or LCS program because it's so dysfunctional. I don't know how my firm got it, but we did. We put together this presentation, and this was the standard presentation we would deliver to members' offices. The biggest part of the lobbying blitz was, at least my contribution, was to basically say to members of Congress, look, if you kill this project, you're killing jobs. And particularly, if you kill this project, you're killing jobs in your state or your district.
In what way was it dysfunctional?
There were cracks developing in the program, quite literally. There was cracks developing in the hull of the ship. The computer system wasn't working right. The weapons were malfunctioning. Everything you can think of that could go wrong with the ship was going wrong with the Littoral Combat Ship.
Today, Wisconsin Senator Tammy Baldwin announced there will be 3 new Littoral Combat ships funded through the National Defense Authorization Act. The LCS program employs thousands of people in the Badger State.
Helping the Big Five to win government contracts is their cozy relationship with their primary customer, the Pentagon. Former defense secretaries or top generals sit on the boards of all 5 firms. Some former weapons executives move back in the other direction to the Department of Defense. The Pentagon has failed all of its last 7 financial audits. It can't account for the majority of its assets. Cases of fraud, like weapons companies overcharging the government, are commonplace. We requested interviews with all of the big 5 US arms firms. No one responded, so we tried our luck at the headquarters of 2 of them. Hello, how are you? The RTX refused to speak to us and asked us to leave. And we got a similar welcome at General Dynamics.
Yeah, unfortunately, we're not allowed to, so we can't do anything about that.
Not allowed to what?
Get access to the property, it's private property.
Oh yeah, that's fine, but is there anyone that would speak to us though? They just said, what did they say exactly? They're busy, okay. Despite the influence weapons companies have over US politics and the trail of destruction they've left around.
The dogs of war are busy. But do you really think that General Dynamics is going to let Al Jazeera come into the front door? Really?
Well, there's been very little in the way of accountability. So I'm about to meet a former prosecutor who's trying to change that. Brad Wolf spent his career as a government lawyer for the state of Pennsylvania. Over the past couple of years, he's led the Merchants of Death War Crimes Tribunal. What is the Merchants of Death?
So the Merchants of Death is a people's tribunal, and people's tribunals have a long-standing tradition such that when the courts refuse to act and hold people or corporations or governments accountable, the citizenry has to act. This tribunal was meant to hold accountable U.S. weapons manufacturers for knowingly producing products that kill innocent civilians in very large numbers across the globe. We interviewed international attorneys, we interviewed military officers, we interviewed award-winning journalists, we interviewed victims, we interviewed doctors, human rights workers, and put all the information together in video documents in order to present it to the judges, but also to present it to the public, because we wanted this to be an educational tool as well.
And what did you conclude?
So after 8 months of presenting evidence to our judges, the judges deliberated and they found the 4 defendants, Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, and the drone maker General Atomics. Our 10 judges found them guilty of war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide as defined by the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court.
The companies, they say, we just make the weapons. We're not in charge of what happens with the weapons or who's dropping it or who's using it. How do you respond to that?
Well, they're not just making the weapons. What they're doing is they are creating a narrative with their dollars. And that narrative is in the halls of Congress through lobbying. They're able to lobby individuals in the Pentagon. They're able to employ retired officers from the Pentagon, put them on their board of directors for large sums of money, and then have them go on television shows like CNN or MSNBC or Fox and tell the American public that it's necessary for military action, which of course means more contract for that weapons maker.
All right, it's back on their heels. We have an opportunity to finish these guys once and for all for their malign and aggressive behavior and destabilizing the Middle East.
So they create a narrative to sell products that they know are killing innocent people.
There are some people who will say that at the end of the day, this tribunal doesn't have any legal jurisdiction. We've heard over and over again how powerful the military-industrial complex is. Is there a way of holding it accountable within the legal framework that we have?
Yes. There is a way to change this. The tribunal, the judges outlined a number of recommendations in their final verdict. So, for instance, if you would have a ban on weapons makers lobbying members of Congress who are approving contracts for these weapons makers, that would be a step in the right direction. If you would prosecute the CEOs of these companies and hold them accountable for war crimes, that too could have a big impact.
Decades of lavish spending in Washington have created the largest military the world has ever seen, with a network of roughly 750 foreign bases and troops stationed in more than 160 countries. In US foreign policy, conflict is a permanent fixture. Since 1945, the US has bombed or invaded at least 28 countries, causing the deaths of millions of people.
Don't kid yourself. You do have a military-industrial complex. They do like war.
President Trump presents himself as the antidote to this status quo.
One of the first meetings I want to have is with President Xi of China, President Putin of Russia. And I want to say, let's cut our military budget in half.
For a moment, the president's talk of budget cuts had the big five on edge.
We are seeing defense stocks pretty much all lower right now. You got Lockheed Martin, RTX, Northrop Grumman, all losing investor money today.
But Trump's actions speak louder. Within just 6 months of taking office, Trump's administration bombed 3 countries: Yemen, Somalia, and Iran.
American military capabilities were on display with Operation Midnight Hammer. Some 75 missiles launched, including 14 GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrators, also known as the bunker buster bombs.
Under the pretext of what the Pentagon called great power competition, Trump has proposed a Pentagon budget worth more than what the next 10 military powers spend on their armed forces combined.
Highest budget we've ever had in history for military, $1 trillion. And getting the greatest missiles, the greatest weapons. And, you know, I hate to do it, but you have to do it because we believe in peace through strength.
The forecast for the US war industry, once again, is looking good, whatever the wider cost.
The arms industry has now infiltrated almost every part of our federal government to the point that civilian control of the military is at times in question. This great power competition lens is so ambiguous that the strategic end is completely unclear, which is perfect for contractors because that means that there's never going to be enough to win a great power competition. No empire has ever maintained its dominant role in the world.
Now think about this for a second. Now Trump is trying to have peace. And Putin's a smart guy, and he knows about the military-industrial complex because the military-industrial complex is in his country too. So, is there really going to be peace? Most likely not.
We have seen that in history over and over again, yet the United States somehow thinks that it is special or different and that it will be able to maintain global dominance forever. And now the United States is poised to spend itself into oblivion in an attempt to maintain this global dominance. And that will come to the detriment of democracy, to the quality of life for Americans, and probably to the detriment of peace in the world.
All right. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the great supplements that I offer and the different products, the health products that will help with your endocrine system, your immune system. A great dual purpose product that I have, very high quality, is the deodorants, citrus and peppermint lavender and tea tree. These deodorants are made from essential oils from the Himalayas. Has no baking soda, no aluminum, very high quality, all natural ingredients. It'll help detoxify your body, and you use it as a daily deodorant. It's for males and females. Get a couple bars for your household. Very high quality deodorants that help to detoxify your body. And again, detoxification of your body is super important to help with your immune system and your endocrine system. I also have Cleanse, which is the first pillar of my core protocol. This will help with the health of your oral cavity and your oral pharynx. The oral pharynx is deeper in your throat, all right? By maintaining good oral health of the oral pharynx and the oral cavity, you're going to have a better mucosal barrier. You're going to have the cells in this area are the epithelial cells. The epithelial cells will be improved. And your immune system is going to be better. You take a teaspoon a day, swish it in your mouth, and gargle. And that way, by gargling for about 20 seconds or 30 seconds, you're helping that oral pharynx. And then you swallow. And that way, you do that every day, you're going to maintain a good immune system. In addition, if you're not feeling well or people around you are not feeling well, it behooves you to take a tablespoon a day or 2 tablespoons a day, and then go back to your maintenance dose when everything's all clear. I've been doing this for a long time, all right, for more than 5 years now. So take a teaspoon every day with the solution and boost up that immune system. Now, I also have structural nanosilver toothpaste. Structural nanosilver toothpaste has no fluoride. This will whiten your teeth, freshen your breath, help with the health of the gum line, reduce inflammation at the gum line, and with good oral hygiene, you're helping your vascular system and your valvular system. Most people don't know that when you get into your later years and you have poor oral hygiene, it's affecting your cardiovascular system too. So get this toothpaste, get a few tubes of this for your household, use discount 5 and get $5 off any order. If you spend $100 or more, you get a free gift. And lastly, Bitchute. I have it in a tube form and the quick dispenser form. Have some at work, have some at home. You never know when you need it. It's a dual purpose product. You can use it as a daily skincare. You can put it on a cut. It'll help to heal the cut, help to heal minor burns and abrasions. You can use it as an aftershave to help heal razor burn. Because guys, when you're shaving, you know, your skin gets irritated, you use the gel, it'll help. Females, if you're shaving your legs, to reduce that razor burn, it's really important to use the gel. Also, if you're not feeling well or someone around you's not feeling well, you can put this on your hands, around your mouth, around your nose, around your eyes, around your ears, lightly coat your nostrils. And what this will do is stay active for 5.5 hours. So it's a great product. It's dual purpose. So make sure you have some at home or at work. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. Use discount 5. You get $5 off any order. The link is in the description of this video and all my videos. To get to my website, the-studio-reykjavik.com. Spend $100 or more, you do get a free gift. Let's listen in on, let's see here. There's this cartel takedown. No. Supposedly, Trump is trying to take down cartels using the military. Let's discuss.
Imagine being able to build the tool you need just by thinking about it.
This video is from DW News, why the U.S. lacks leverage over China on trade.
Meet Base 44, a complete AI creation platform.
Donald Trump seems to be pretty desperate to strike up a trade deal with China. I think to outsiders, it does look like he has caved in on a very, very important matter, a huge strategic error. They do have very strong leverage over the United States. The Chinese have got the Americans over a barrel, so to speak.
A trade truce between the United States and China is due to end in a few days' time. So what happens next? Let's talk about it with George Magnus, Research Associate at Oxford University's China Centre and the author of Red Flags, Why Xi's China is in Jeopardy. George, thank you so much for joining us again. Now, if we look at the trade deals the US has made so far, whether with the EU or Japan, the perception seems to be that America holds the cards. Where does the balance of power lie with China?
I think it's quite complicated, certainly with regards to the EU and Japan and South Korea and so on. I mean, it looks like the United States holds the cards. In practice, in fact, I think those allies actually also have probably weighed decisions about whether it makes sense for them to do this kind of deal. But leaving that aside and moving, as you asked, to the China part of this, I think, Donald Trump seems to be pretty desperate to strike up a what we call a kind of a phase one type trade deal, which is similar to the deal that he negotiated with Xi Jinping back in 2017, which is really an undertaking on the part of the Chinese to buy more American products. I mean, he's pretty desperate to have that happen. He seems to be going out of his way to, meet Xi Jinping somewhere, perhaps at the Ep6 summit later this year. Lots of things have happened in Washington which seem to suggest that he's kind of been soft, been giving in to Chinese demands on export controls, particularly for NVIDIA's very high-end H20 chip, so-called, and a few other things as well. So the impression we get, certainly, is that Trump's leverage with China is much less.
I want to touch on something you just mentioned, because that phase one of a trade deal already happened in Trump's first term, and it seems it was never enforced. Am I right in that perception?
Well, the Chinese never lived up to their commitments to purchase the products that they promised they would. And in fact, the shelf life of that deal was pretty short. I suspect the shelf life of another type of deal like this will also be pretty short, since there aren't really any mechanisms that work or that both sides respect for policing it and enforcing it. But it seems to be quite important to the US administration to be able to trumpet the notion that there has been, will have been a trade deal with China, that Trump will want to boast that only he could have brought this about. Of course, there's also stuff going on in the background, right? Because one of the reasons that the Americans basically kind of balked a little bit at the 145% tariffs that were announced earlier this year is because of the Chinese decision to counter America's aggression, as they saw it in trade, by restricting or withholding shipments of rare earths, to which American car companies and other high-tech companies lobbied the administration and said, we can't really function unless we have access to these metals. So that's really the product of an oversight and a kind of a huge strategic error that not just the Americans, but the Europeans as well, have made over the last 10 or 15 years by effectively outsourcing the processing of these rare earths to China, for now at least.
To what extent would you say that particular move, that decision to restrict the export of these critical elements and magnets, set the tone for trade negotiations?
Yeah, I think it was quite important, really. I mean, it was certainly from a negotiating standpoint. I mean, China had every right and every interest to do that because it's an area where they do have very strong leverage over the United States and over other countries. They tried the same thing with Japan about something like 10, 12, 15 years ago, which the Japanese actually took it very, very seriously and proceeded to develop a more diversified access to these metals. And I don't think they're in the same position today that they were in then. But, you can't really fix these things overnight. And the United States is clearly not in a position of being able to solve it in a matter of weeks or months. I mean, one gets the impression, certainly, that in this particular regard, that the Chinese have got the Americans over a barrel, so to speak.
You also mentioned that the US walked back on its own restrictions on chip exports, allowing NVIDIA to send this H20 chip to China. Some people describe that as a strategic error. How would you assess that decision?
Yeah, I mean, it's
your business is crushing it, but unless they've got the right help desk software, your agents can get caught in a whirlpool of tickets.
Yeah, I mean, it's not something. I mean, I was in a position of advising the American government, but I think if I were, and if I think lots of people that I know who have commented on this who are much more knowledgeable about it than I am, if they were, I think their advice would be to, they shouldn't have done it. That it's basically giving away a crown jewel, but it's obviously kind of fallen into the scope of negotiations between the US and China because Washington seems to want to go quite a long way to try to get this type of trade arrangement with Xi Jinping for whatever reason, or for reasons that Trump probably knows best. But I think to outsiders it does look like he has caved in on a very, very important and strategic matter. I suspect in good time that actually, this will all be unraveling. But for now, I think that is the case.
I want to look more closely at this trading relationship. The US is China's most important export market, but the share of its exports going to the US has actually fallen in recent years, making up around 14% last year. Do you see this trend continuing in spite of Washington's crackdown on transshipping?
I think it could well continue, yes, because of course, as you rightly say, that the reason that China's share of imports into the United States has dropped so markedly, is reflected in the fact that the shares of other countries like Mexico, Thailand, Vietnam, India, has gone up because of the transshipment. There are lots of different ways in which Chinese firms and Chinese producers can get around these tariffs. Obviously, they can shift their production lock, stock, and barrel to third countries, and then they can stamp their products, made in Vietnam or made in Mexico, bona fide. Or there are other ways of doing it. They're not legal necessarily or recognized by the WTO, but you can effectively, ship products into, a foreign port, rebrand them, and effectively, get them re-exported. This is a very, very kind of common practice now, and I think it's probably going to get more common because it's quite difficult to police and quite difficult to control. So I don't think we should be put off or be distracted by just the straight bilateral trade contraction between China and the United States. It's just that the trade is taking place, but in a different way.
You mentioned the World Trade Organization there and the question of enforcement. What kind of role do you see for multilateral institutions in the future, given their declining relevance?
Well, in practice, none, because the WTO's decision-making capacity has effectively been undermined by, the proximate reason why it's been undermined is because of America's refusal to sanction, the appointment of judges for dispute settlement. But anyway, I think that, the sort of respect or the kind of regard which WTO is held in nowadays is obviously much less than it used to be. And, the Americans are not completely without cause in complaining that the WTO, that China's basically taken advantage of the WTO. And so there are kind of bona fide reasons why, maybe the WTO is not best suited to be able to, address some of the functions or the malfunction that we've got in the global trading system. In fact, discussing this with, lots of people nowadays, I think the IMF actually is much better positioned to be able to draw up new rules for trade, but that would require a lot of cooperation and collaboration between the Americans and the Chinese, the Europeans, and lots of others. And that the basis for that collaboration may not actually be there, unfortunately.
Why is the IMF in a better position? Is it just because of the way it's structured as opposed to the WTO?
Because I think the argument in the WTO, the WTO basically polices the accepted rules of international trade and commerce. And the IMF is supposed to have a much deeper and broader macroeconomic role in determining the justification and basis for the countries running surpluses, deficits, imposing capital controls, trade controls, and so on. The World Trade Organization can call foul if somebody does something that it goes against the rules and somebody else brings a complaint. The WTO can hear that complaint and make a judgment. But actually, the problem that we have really isn't necessarily with the rules of international trade. It's specifically, i.e. tariffs and quotas and so on, but it actually is with a lot of controls and what we call behind the border measures, which are industrial policies, subsidies, procurement, below market borrowing programs, the kinds of things that don't really make the headlines of news and so on because they're hidden and because they're domestic policy, ostensibly domestic policy, but they result in the creation of these big surpluses and deficits, which are the primary cause of trade and commercial conflict between, well, ostensibly between the US and China, but between lots of other countries as well.
Yeah, because I remember in Trump's first.
This viral productivity tool is shutting down. Well, sort of. This guy used to work at Facebook, but he left to make the best productivity.
Yeah, because I remember in Trump's first term, there was a lot of talk about what would be in phase 2 of a trade deal, and this never happened. But the chat then was that it would be all about intellectual property and overcapacity. Do you see these issues being tackled in further negotiations between the two countries?
Yeah, I don't think overcapacity will form part of the negotiations, although I could imagine that the Americans would like to make it part of that discussion. And it's a much bigger problem now than it was in 2017, 2018, because obviously it's not just about electric vehicles and batteries, which everybody reads about or hears about all the time, but it applies in steel, glass, cement, chemicals, and in the domestic economy of China, in the housing industry, infrastructure, solar equipment, wind turbines, almost everything, because it's part of China's industrial policy to actually focus on producing and production and supply. And they don't have bankruptcy laws where weak firms, not like we do, where there's a discipline for weak firms to go out of business or to account for losses and so on. So it is a big, big issue. But it ought to be addressed in the context of international negotiations, because it's not just the United States that has kind of a problem with this. But I don't really see where those discussions would take place. They're not really. They might take place in the context of the WTO, but I think the WTO is,
I think a very important focus of the United States is to come to the realization, including the business community, that China is using its economic prowess to build up its military with its navy and with its army, and that the chances of bringing in Taiwan into the fold of mainland China is increasing. But you have people in the business community in the United States that says, we can't have tariffs. We got to have just the same old status quo as for the last 35 years, where we just import goods and just let China rise. No. Because there's going to be a feedback loop. If China does rise and erodes the hegemonic power of the United States, then the economic viability of the United States starts to go down. Case in point, look at what happened with the UK after World War I. They were decimated because of World War I and World War II, and they basically lost their empire. They didn't win. Did they win World War I and World War II? No, not really. Not really. They survived it. They didn't win it. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the vitamin K2 MK7 molecule. It stacks really well with the D3. D3 and K2 is going to help to absorb calcium, especially if you have magnesium in your diet or through a supplementation, because magnesium increases the efficacy of D3. But the point here is that when you take vitamin D3 and vitamin K2, what it will do is help you to absorb calcium, and you do resistance training, and it's going to help to build the bone density. Also, it's going to help to pull some of that calcium depositing around plaque in your vascular system. So it's going to help with your vascular health too, right? And reduce calcium deposits. Another way to improve the health of your vascular system is to stack it with the nattokinase. Now, you can take nattokinase separately, but again, if you take my advice and stack with the K2, D3, and the nattokinase, you're supercharging that cardiovascular health. Nattokinase breaks up clots. When you have plaque, you're creating when blood is flowing around that plaque, what's going to happen is there's turbulence. Now, if you have too much turbulence, too much dead flow, all right, stagnant flow, clots will form. Well, you need to break up those clots, so you need to have the nattokinase. Also, nattokinase helps to bring down the LDL levels and increase your HDL levels. That means that your total cholesterol will improve. When your total cholesterol improves, guess what? You have less LDL that's oxidized. Less LDL that's oxidized means less plaque buildup. So you want to take the K2, the D3, and the nattokinase together for vascular health, and the D3K2 with resistance training is going to help with bone density. So it's a dual purpose stack. Also, no matter what the season is, you need lozenges and drops. So get the elderberry lozenges that I have. It's made from structural lemon silver. And get the drops. I have it in blueberry, honey and lemon, and cherry. Get a few bags for your household. The drops and the lozenges. You have that irritation in your throat, take them right away to mitigate, no matter what the season is. And believe me, razor throat is coming in the fall. So you better be prepared. And collagen. Collagen is a dual purpose supplement. It's a powder. You mix it with soft foods, filtered water, milk, or even a smoothie. But take it every day. Do resistance training. It's going to help with your musculature, your joint health, your cartilage, your tendons, your ligaments, your bones. But it also helps with your skin, hair, and nails. So please go to my store and get the collagen. Very high quality. Use discount 5, you get $5 off any order. If you spend $100 or more, you get a free gift.
That's rather emaciated compared with what it was once. And I think there has to be a bona fide reason or justification or willingness on the part of Beijing to be able or to want to be able to talk about it and to show willing to curb it, which I don't think they're really willing to do.
Whatever you think of this model, is it even sustainable? Because if I understand you right, at the moment we have the situation where Chinese consumers have way too many products they don't want to buy. They don't have the money to buy all these electric vehicles. There's an oversupply of housing. There is infrastructure that's being underused. I mean, the money for all of these things has to come from somewhere. Do you see this sustaining itself over time, or do you think there's some sort of collapse coming?
There's 2 reasons why there's a collapse that's coming. Well, 3 reasons that potentially a collapse for China. 1, population is starting to decline because of their one China policy is catching up with them. The one kid China policy. Even though they changed that policy back about 10 years ago or whatever it was, maybe a little bit more. But their population is a problem. 2, they are producers, not consumers. So they're not used to consuming. The ones that have invested in real estate in these ghost towns, and now they're having their own version of Lehman. And they're trying to keep it really quiet. But they have a crisis in housing prices because they overbuilt. So you have an aging population. So the demographic isn't right. They're in producing mode, not consuming mode. And they are using lots of their resources for a military buildup that looks like they will try to reduce the hegemonic power of the United States Navy in the Pacific. So when that war does happen, it's going to be costly to both people, both countries, the United States and China. Now, I take the stance that the United States will win, but we have to be smart about it. So there are these 3 vectors that are showing that, you know what, China is going to be will have problems. Now, China is a large country in landmass and also in population. And it's been kind of, that amalgamation of different regions has been forced upon it. I think that there is a internal dynamic that if the CCP broke up, that certain regions of China would actually break away from main China and become their own country. I can see this in the future where China will break up. Now, I don't think it'll break up into 1,000 pieces, but I wouldn't be surprised that 2 or 3 major regions break away.
Well, I mean, a Leninist basic
Hearts. No two beat the same. So we built a team of the best heart surgeons who always find the one approach that's best for you.
I mean, a Leninist-based economy has all sorts of tools and controls available to it to be able to, what we used to say in the financial crisis in 2008, extend and pretend. You just kind of push the problem out into the next, 2, 3, 5 years and pretend that it's not an issue now. I mean, banks did that all the time until obviously the regulations were tightened up. But national governments can do that almost with impunity. And so I mean, the pressure is certainly there. I think that Chinese policymakers, many of them, and certainly many Chinese economists at think tanks, for example, I think they're well aware that the industrial policy export model which China is pursuing is leading it down a very kind of rocky path, and that the model needs to change towards one which emphasizes consumption and imports more. And if it did that, I'm pretty sure that a lot of the problems in international trade, not all of them, but a lot of them would actually diminish. But for the Chinese government to do that and to bite the bullet on that kind of huge shift in the economic model, you're basically asking it to go against the kind of the fundamental political principles according to which it rules, which is to stay in power and to restrict the distribution of power to anybody else. If you want a more kind of consumer-oriented or Western style of economy, you basically carving out kind of different niches of economic and political power, which the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, has no interest in sharing. It's a big problem.
These very policies you mentioned have been encouraging other countries to try to de-risk their relationships with Beijing. But now Trump's tariff war has made ties with the US seem just as precarious in a way. How is this tariff war shaping how the rest of the world views China?
Well, there was, in the early days of Trump's kind of tariff campaign during the early spring and late spring, there was a lot of sentiment around that, we have to, de-risk ourselves actually from the United States, which has become an unreliable ally. And, we don't really know, we don't really want to pay Trump's tariffs. And, there are lots of excuses being made that people should diversify their trade away from the United States and towards China. I mean, it's certainly in the United Kingdom. I don't think it's going to happen, but I mean, there were certainly people in the government that were kind of speaking along those lines. And of course, it's nonsense because the Chinese market, I mean, although the Chinese have very, very high levels of imports because, it's a $20 trillion economy, but the growth of imports in China in the last 5 years has been pretty much zero. China's model is really all about exporting products to people, not importing them. So the idea that, the EU or Britain or Korea or Japan, Brazil, India and so on, the countries would find new export markets in China as a substitute for the United States was always a fantasy, and it is a fantasy. So I think that there's been a kind of reluctant, biting of the bottom lip on the part of, US allies and countries that are essentially aligned with, let's say, Western commerce and Western trade. Now, they've basically agreed reluctantly to say, well, if we can get 10, 15%, even 20% tariffs, with the United States, we don't like it, but we can live with it. And we don't really want to get into a kind of a bidding war with Trump, where if we retaliate, he'll just uber retaliate, to the point where relations will be severely compromised or break down. So, yeah, I mean, I think that there's been a bit of a kind of reconciliation, shall we say, with the kind of original view. And many countries, not all of the ones that Trump boasted about, but many countries have reached trade agreements with the US in which they've agreed higher tariffs, but not necessarily crippling. I imagine they will adapt, and I think that's the reality. I mean, they've agreed to do it, but through gritted teeth.
You've mentioned China's reliance on exports, but one thing it has been importing is Russian energy. Why has it not been getting the same slack as India for doing that?
That's a good question. And I think the answer is because Trump has, or the US administration has no chance of being able to persuade China to do, many things actually, and one of the things that it can't persuade Beijing to do is to change its policy towards Russia, including China's imports of fossil fuels, including oil and coal and so on. Whereas it thinks, the American administration thinks it has leverage over India and can persuade India to cut its. At least, some of that oil that it's getting from Russia isn't all about consumption in India. A lot of it is, but a lot of it is also transshipping Russian oil to third countries. So I imagine, I don't really know the details, none of us do at this stage, that the pressure on the Indian government from the United States has been to try to curtail fossil fuel imports from Russia. But, the Americans probably feel they have a chance of being able to do that, whereas I think they have zero chance of being able to persuade Chinese to do that.
George Magnus, we could talk about this all day, but very sadly, I have to leave it there. Thank you so much.
October 2023.
If you haven't exercised in years.
Vladimir Putin in Alaska.
Right. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the vitamin C and magnesium. This is a dual-purpose supplement. It'll help with your skin, boost up your immune system, and magnesium helps with brain function. Magnesium also increases the efficacy of vitamin D3. If you're 40 years of age or older, you need to be taking digestive enzyme complex. Why? It reduces the load on your pancreas. It allows you to digest carbohydrates, proteins, and lipids easier. You're going to be able to absorb those nutrients with less stress on your pancreas. So please make sure you get the digestive enzyme complex. Also, digestive enzyme complex has bromelain in it. It helps to break up clots because it's fibrinolytic. Digestive enzyme complex also has proteolytic enzymes. They'll break up glycoproteins. That was important in 2020, remember? And that's the reason why I said, take digestive enzyme complex as part of the protocol. Most accurate person on the planet when it came to the crisis of 2020. Now, Goodnight Formula. Goodnight Formula has tryptophan, melatonin, GABA, and passion flower. What Goodnight Formula is going to do is allow you to be in those 3 to 5 cycles of REM sleep and deep sleep to be able to detoxify your central nervous system, to consolidate memory, and to be well rested. If you are sleep deprived chronically, you are building up toxins in your central nervous system, and you're not consolidating memory. And therefore, with chronic sleep deprivation, you will end up having a higher chance of getting early onset of dementia. So make sure that you take Goodnight Formula. Take it at night. Stack it with the digestive enzyme complex to help with your pancreas. And take the vitamin C and magnesium to boost up your immune system and help with your skin and your brain function. This is a powerful stack. Now you can take them individually, or you can take my advice and stack them accordingly, and you get a synergistic effect. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. Use discount 5 to get $5 off any order. Another great stack And you can take them separately or mix them and match them the way you want. But another great stack is ubiquinol. Ubiquinol is the most bioavailable form of CoQ10. If you're taking CoQ10, most likely you're taking the wrong kind. So ubiquinol is the most bioavailable form. You can't find anything better than this. So ubiquinol will help soak up free radicals, help with the health of the mitochondria. You're going to have more ATP, so you're going to have more energy. And ubiquinol helps to protect your neurons. That's why it's so important to take ubiquinol. Protect those neurons. Omega-3 helps with cardiovascular health, brings down inflammation, and also helps with your lipid profile. Helps to bring down LDL levels and helps to increase your HDL levels. By taking omega-3 every day, you're helping your cardiovascular health. Resveratrol. Resveratrol is an antioxidant. It's going to soak up free radicals. It's going to help with the health of the mitochondria. You're going to have more energy. You're going to have useful gene expression. It's going to get rid of cells that are in senescence. I've been taking resveratrol for decades. It stacks really well with ubiquinol, NAD+, C60, clarity factor. So a good stack would be resveratrol for the useful gene expression and soaking up free radicals, the omega-3 to help with your cardiovascular health, and the ubiquinol to increase your energy levels, soak up those free radicals, and protect your neurons. Powerful stack. So go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, use discount 5. If you spend $100 or more, you get a free gift until supplies last. All right, let's go to Trump orders colleges to hand over student admission data.
Before, a complete AI creation platform.
President Trump is continuing his crackdown on higher education, ordering the education department to start collecting data on the race, gender, test scores, and GPAs of college applicants. This comes amid his push to target race-based university admissions, which some conservatives view as illegal discrimination.
Now, as a reminder, the Supreme Court already ruled against the use of affirmative action in admissions in 2023, but the High Court says colleges may still consider how a student's race shaped their lives if applicants share that information in their admissions essays. Still, Trump alleges that colleges may be skirting the ruling. Legal experts say the new order could have a chilling effect on universities, and experts say the order could wind up making wealth even more influential in admissions. Northeastern University history professor Simon Rabinovich writes, quote, "Say it over and over until people understand. Affirmative action for the rich is the central plank of elite college admissions."
Dartmouth economics professor Paul Novosad says college dishonesty about admissions practices is a central part of the public's loss of trust, since colleges don't seem capable of being honest about this stuff, so taking away the option of dishonesty seems good. All right, so this story broke yesterday. Daily Caller first to report.
Nice.
A little feather in our cap.
Okay, congrats. There you go.
We love a good scoop. But yes, they are asking colleges to turn over admissions data because the concern is that they are using the essay carve out as basically a way to do backdoor affirmative action. So the Supreme Court did have this exclusion where they said students can talk about race in their admissions essays, and colleges can use that to get a sort of holistic picture of the applicant and understand their life experience and things of that nature. But what they can't do is use those essays to determine that someone is a minority and maybe give them more points in the admissions process, so to speak, simply because they are of a minority race. And so the Trump administration wants this admissions data to basically make sure that that's not happening.
And I think saying it just as it is, standalone, is like, oh yeah, of course we need to be very transparent in our admissions and see all the stuff. And like, yeah, by itself, without the whole history of our country, that's a fine statement. But I think like it intimidates college and actually discourages diversity, which we know is a pillar of equality in our country, understanding why affirmative action was even created, right? Because there were a lack of opportunities for people of color to be in these spaces systemically. And I think when you think about historically Black colleges and universities like Howard University up the block, these were created because Black people were traditionally left out wholly of the college or university process and excluded widely in a large majority. And so even though we had elevated and extended past that, and our society is very proudly diverse and integrated. You know, factors to consider about wealth and how it's still unfair advantages for people are still like heavily weighted on the college process, which will lead it to be less diverse because of people. And
here's the problem with her logic. You need to start thinking generationally, not just yourself, not just your kids, but generationally. And by viewing it generationally, you're going to be able to move up the social ladder and be able to get your future offspring into these more elite institutions. All right? So just because, for example, a lot of people, they think, oh, you know, you work hard and you're gonna, you know, you're going to, you know, reach the upper status of society. Most people, rags to riches don't happen in the United States. That's in most cases, that's the case. That's true. It's rare, very rare, where it's rags to riches. All right, but you can go from, let's say, middle class to upper middle class, or from poor to middle class. That probability, upward mobility, is very high in the United States. But rags to riches, not so much. Where you're, you know, poor and then you're a multimillionaire, that doesn't usually happen. It's rare. Now, if you focus on generational, where 2 or 3 generations, then your probability of staying in the upper class of society increases. The problem is that many people, when they have that upper mobility, they don't think generationally and they waste their money. So if you want your kid, let's say you're a minority family, and you want your kids to go to elite schools, you need to either be lucky, or you need to think it's not your kids that are going to get in, it's going to be your grandkids. And it's by instituting moral character, a better moral character, hard work, and saving, and smart decisions throughout life that will lead for generational upward mobility. Most Blacks don't think this way. They don't think generationally. And that's the difference. Because you think about that big migration that came from Europe in the late 1700s, the 1800s, the early 1900s. What were the common themes? Mostly poor people that found work, got their kids into education, and they had upward mobility, and those kids ended up having kids that ended up being in the upper middle class. That's how it works. But if you have Black people that just keep on thinking that it's going to be upward mobility, rags to riches in your lifetime, it doesn't work like that in most cases. You have to think generationally. If you want true wealth, you have to think generationally. And that means that you have to have a standard bearer for the family, the house of whatever, that is the founder of that generational jump, that generational rise. Black people don't think that way. They want their bitches and their hoes. They want immediacy. All right. But it's not just Blacks. It's other minority groups that aren't understanding that it's about thinking generationally. If you want your family to be in the upper class of society, you got to step it for it to be sustainable.
Diverse because of people and their access. So when you think about legacy emissions, that's an issue because your family or someone had you in the school, and so now you get in.
For people that are not of color, so then your legacy will continue to be people not of color. then you think about how this benefits families that significantly.
But
get
if you,
financial-
but the thing is that if you have people that are thinking generationally and you're moving up and you start donating, then you'll have more power. See, instead of saying, so it's really an issue of, is it collectivism or individualism? See, the rags to riches, idea that, oh, just give us a chance. No matter what the minority is, this is not an anti any color type rhetoric. This is just the way the system works. You have to put in your time, and sometimes your time is generational time, not just a few years of this and a few years of that. It's generational. So if you're moving up the ladder and you start to donate and you start to have political power and then you start to have access to these other echelon aspects of society. But if you're wasting your funds, if you're wasting your strategy on just yourself, and you don't think of the family as one big unit, and you think with a generational plan instead of just your plan, you're never gonna rise up. It'll never happen. But you'll have this conversation where it's like, it's collectivism, we gotta have more, more help to get in, and then, but really? Do you really deserve it? If you didn't have the forethought to actually think generationally? Most people don't go from rags to riches in the same generation. It doesn't usually happen. It's rare. So there's this survivor bias. People go, well, look at Steve Jobs. He was an orphan, and he was adopted, and then he ended up starting up Apple, and he became multi-billionaire. Or look at the guy that started Oracle. His name escapes me at the moment. Or some of these other rags to riches stories, Carnegie, Rockefeller. These are rare situations. But everyone thinks they're going to be a Rockefeller. Everyone thinks that they're going to be a Steve Jobs. If you're young and you dress in a mock turtleneck and you dress in black, you must be the next Steve Jobs. Really? He was a rare bird, and rare birds are rare by definition. Got to think generationally. That's how it works.
For colleges, like, do we want everybody in the school who's not qualified being somebody's son or daughter or niece or nephew that gave $1 million to the School of Journalism? No, we also want great writers to be in the School of Journalism from all backgrounds. Then you have early admissions programs. Research suggests that.
How do you define qualified? And this is what one of the justices at the Supreme Court was saying. What's qualified? How do you define qualified? Just a GPA and an assessment score? Here's a fact. The higher your GPA, the higher your assessment score, the chances are you'll make less money, not more money. So what's qualified for elite institutions? And I think it was Gorsuch, Justice Gorsuch, that basically said, well, what if the university wants squash players? And that's the qualifier. So what's qualified mean? See, everyone thinks that it's about assessment scores. But the reality of the situation is at elite institutions, the students that are coming in aren't the 4.0 with a near perfect score on the SAT. It's the ones that tried to get an internship and they were, learning the business, or did some sort of unique science project. When they pepper their application with those kinds of things, and they have a GPA of, let's say, 3.6 or 3.7 or 3.8, they blow away the ones that had a 4.0 because it's about hard work and determination. So what's a qualifier? What is the qualifier? And this is the problem with the minority groups pushing elite institutions that you have to have some sort of affirmative action or DEI policy to allow students to be integrated in these elite institutions. So what's the qualifier? The qualifier actually isn't to have a 4.0. It's to think around. If these schools don't want just boilerplate student. And boilerplate student is perfect score, 4.2, 4.4, right? Or and a high assessment score. It doesn't work like that. It's much more of a mosaic. So you have actually a higher probability of going into these elite institutions if you understand that mosaic. So when these minority groups that are saying, oh, we don't have the funds to be able to get the student to have tutor classes to be able to have a near perfect SAT score, all right, but why didn't they do other things that pepper the actual resume, the CV, to the school for the application? There are many opportunities. There are more opportunities now for minorities than ever in American history. But what's the qualifier? It's not a perfect score on the SAT. It's not a 4.0. I guarantee you that. So that people are not paying attention to it. But what it is, it's about collectivism. Collectivism wants to push a certain agenda instead of having individualism. And when you think individualistically, you also have an opportunity to actually see, okay, short-term and long-term. And the ones that have grown their family's wealth, it's not rags to riches in one generation. It is multiple generational. And most minorities don't think multi-generational. Now, part of it is that some of them are lower on the lower end of the social economic spectrum, and they're just living day to day. And that's understandable that they can't think generationally because they're in survival mode. But when the minority group moves from poor to middle class, there is zero reason not to think generationally. But they don't want to, because what they do is they want to keep up with the Joneses within their neighborhood. And so they're middle class and they overreach their true spending capacity. And they don't think generationally, and so their kids don't have the opportunity to have a launching pad to move into the upper echelons of society. It takes 2 to 3 generations to do it, if you're smart. If the family standard bearer creates the right worth ethics, and fortitude within the offspring. And they think this way, and then they launch. You think Rothschilds just magically became trillionaires? You think the Rothschilds just magically did that? The standard bearer of the Rothschilds was a poor kid. But he understood this idea of generational wealth. He understood that you had to teach your kids hard work and think generationally. That's how Rockefeller did it. Rockefeller was lucky, and he almost went bankrupt, but he was lucky in the oil industry, and was able to be at the right time, at the right place at the right time with the automobile industry, and convinced Ford to not go to ethanol and to use gasoline. And that launched Rockefeller's wealth. Now, when they did the trust bust, it made Rockefeller even more money when they broke up Standard Oil. They didn't realize that, but that's part of the reason why they don't want to break up Meta, because it'll make Zuckerberg even more wealthy. But in Rockefeller's case, it was a rags to riches because he was a poor kid. All right? But that was a very unique time period in American society. But what did he learn? He learned something from the Rothschilds, and that was you have to instill proper ethics within the offspring to maintain the wealth, to be able to have more power, to be able to not just be the average. You got to think generationally. And most minorities, even whites in general, in white suburbia, don't think generationally. What happens is they have a good job, they save some money, they have a large 401k over time, or they have property or whatever. They die, maybe they have about $5 million in savings or in assets. They retire. They retire relatively comfortably compared to other people in the United States. They burn down their savings. By the time they die, and let's say they have 2 kids, some of that wealth is going to be transferred over, maybe $1 million, maybe $2 million. But the thing is that most of these people aren't thinking generationally. Because if they were thinking generationally, they would be pooling their assets together and thinking more like the Rothschilds. So instead, you have white America demonizing the Rothschilds on what a very poor kid did to become the richest family in the world. But they'll just demonize them. There's a lesson to be learned on what the Rothschilds did. Now you have all these conspiracy theorists that are going, well, maybe there are demons, or maybe they're, part of, some big cabal and blah, blah, blah. Just boil it down to the very fact it's about thinking generationally. And that's the key to success in the United States. And stop asking for a handout.
Reading that app.
Every day you wait to make that hire, your competitors get another step ahead. With somewhere.com, we can fill your role.
Research suggests that I was reading that applicants are actually 3 times more likely to be white in those early admissions programs. Then you have disproportionate access to resources. So when we talk about
But if you think generationally, these minorities, that second and third generation, you're going to have the resources to be able to do the early application. I mean, to get into college these days is almost, to get into a good school, like the top 50 in the United States, it's almost like going to medical school. It's that intense, all right? Now, that's not healthy for kids, no matter if they're of wealth or of simple, humble means. So that's another issue. But the issue with this is that if you think generationally, you will have the resources. So if your kid can't get in because you're just not at that rung of this socioeconomic ladder, it's okay. It's okay. Because your kids might be able to do it if you think generationally. And that's what many immigrants back in the 1800s, back in the early 1900s thought. It wasn't the ones that immigrated, it was their kids or their kids' kids that ended up moving up to upper class.
It's testing, SAT prep courses, elite like services that allow you to write better essays. Obviously, people from a higher income have the luxury to consider things like that. And so when you're preparing for these tests and not taking into consideration what socioeconomic background somebody comes from, then you're not considering that perhaps they didn't get and I don't know how the SATs are graded now. When I was back, it was like 1,500 or whatever. Like maybe they didn't get the highest score because they didn't have the opportunity to prep, but they still are brilliant and could probably bring massive things to, let's say, Columbia.
Exactly. And that's why that's why it's the other items on the CV. It's not just it's not the high SAT or GPA. It's some of these other internships and extracurriculars that are really important that kind of like stand out. Now, if you want to go to Harvard, everyone gets read at Harvard. Everyone. Every single applicant gets read because it's read across the whole United States. No matter where the applicant is applying, that region is divided amongst different alumnus that read the applicant. Every single application's read. So it is, if your kid isn't smart enough to get into Harvard, they don't deserve to be in Harvard.
Or Northwestern or any school, And then there's also a wealth gap, in standardized testing. So, there's a huge wealth gap between Black and white families, and it impacts access to test prep courses, like we were just talking about. So when you add all those things in and then consider why affirmative action or race is considered, it's because largely a lot of times people affected by all the things I just named are people of color.
Wait a minute here. But the thing is that you can get people of color, all right? Let's say the guy goes and works in the automobile industry as a blue collar worker and is making $120K plus overtime. All right? Great benefits, 401K, pension, right? 401K or a pension, and good health care. He does that for 40 years, has 2 kids. He can easily put them into college. Now, they may not have the chops to be at the 6 or 9 of the elite institutions in the United States, but they could get into good schools because he has the means to do it. And by bringing up the next generation with the ethics and with transferring of funds and thinking generationally, that blue collar Black worker that was on the automobile line has now created a launching pad for his kids and his grandkids. That's thinking generationally. But what happens normally is that they get a good job and they buy a boat, they buy a second home, they overextend on their credit, and eventually there's some sort of economic downturn and they start to have to sell at distressed prices. And guess what? They're not thinking generationally. They're thinking only their generation. They're thinking only themselves. And that is the problem with most of America.
Unfortunately, in this country. And so you still want to give people the same opportunity if they're smart, if they're promising, if they sold you on their essay that they belong and are passionate about this school. You want to give them an opportunity to also achieve the American dream, understanding our country's history.
Yeah, I think you hit on a really important point here, which is that I view a lot of the...
What is the American dream? The American dream isn't rags to riches. It's very rare for that to happen. Rare. It's even rarer now than ever. The American dream is work hard and think long term, generationally, and you'll get there. The probability of success, if you think generationally, will happen. But because we're so me-oriented and want instant gratification, there's the problem. And so when you start whining that there's disparities in income levels and in opportunities because you want instant gratification, don't be surprised that the system shits on you.
Lack of diversity of all kinds, not just racial kinds, in colleges to really be more about socioeconomic status. As someone who comes from a blue-collar background and was a first-generation college student, I was really grateful to benefit from programs at Georgetown that were catered towards making sure that we had the same opportunities once we got to school. And I think the really brilliant way to get around this issue and really not take race out of the equation, but make it more about giving people with less...
Well, the answer is what DrPaulCottrell is saying. The parents need to look in the mirror and say, are you extending yourself? Are you thinking generationally? Maybe you're the problem. And then if you start changing that behavior and thinking more generationally and being more prudent with your savings, being more prudent with the way you're raising your kids, you'll get there. But it may take 1 or 2 generations. But when you do that, you're building the foundation for future generations to sustain that. Now, some people would say, well, after 2 generations, wealth starts to decline. Well, part of that is because you didn't instill hard work and good ethics within the family unit. And those cases are family businesses usually, where the family business is started up by an individual. That family business is passed on to one of the kids and then their kids. And then normally, because they weren't instilled with the proper worth ethic and the proper management of money methods, it leads to the downfall of the business. That's a different story. People need to start, people need to start thinking about generationally.
Advantages early in life, the opportunity to attend these really great colleges is by focusing on making sure that there's diversity in socioeconomic status, which would disproportionately benefit minority students because, as you mentioned, there is this wealth gap that exists. Coleman Hughes, who's a really prominent Black conservative commentator, talks about this issue a lot and how this could be a way to keep in line with the Civil Rights Act while also making sure that people from disadvantaged backgrounds still have opportunities. Because I think one of the dangers with affirmative action programs, and to be fair, the Supreme Court, when they first talked about affirmative action decades ago, acknowledged that there would come a time where they would.
All right, let me get this straight. All right, so she's coming from a disadvantaged background. First person in her family to go to college type. All right, this newscaster on the Hill. All right, she graduates from Georgetown. What does she end up being? A newscaster. Why not an engineer? Why not someone that actually does something that's productive for the society? See the point that I'm making here? It didn't have the work ethos that takes generations to build into. But there's tons of people like her and all over X that will demonize, wealthy families, and they just, because they're not wealthy too, right? But they don't realize what was the secret sauce. The secret sauce. What was the KFC recipe for the Rothschilds or for the Rockefellers or for even Ford, the Ford family? It's to think generationally and stop asking for the system for a handout. Because if you are a master of your own fucking destiny, no one can take that away from you.
Because they had largely achieved their goals in giving minority students more advantages. But what we're looking at now is a situation where the color of the skin does not capture the totality of a person's background or experience. You could have wealthy offspring of African political leaders being weighted the same as someone from an inner city Chicago or New York neighborhood because they both are Black. And that's obviously not a fair situation. It actually crowds out exactly the kind of people who come from a lower socioeconomic status or a place with less opportunity because they are being marked at the same level as someone who does have advantages but happens to have the same skin color.
And I don't think it has to be an or thing. I think it should be and. So if we are going to say, fine, we got rid of affirmative action, we are also going to say we should get rid of anybody basically paying their way into colleges. Anybody.
The thing is the whole. If you get back to why the affirmative action was happening, what was going on at that time? Blacks at that time, you're talking about there were separate bathrooms, separate water faucets, different places to sit in a restaurant. That's where this came from. Now, fast forward to 2025. Do you see that segregation happening? Absolutely not. There's more opportunity now than ever for minorities in the United States. By far. And not only that, there's more opportunities because of technology to learn things for free. Skills that are important to make money, to build businesses. So to say that there's not opportunities for minorities is total horseshit. Rosa Parks had less opportunity when she was a 20-year-old or a 30-year-old than a typical 20 or 30-year-old today of the same ethnicity. So affirmative action was about getting it to a point where individuals of minority status was able to get into the workforce, to have equal civil liberties, and for them to have the self-determination to make the proper decisions so they can have upward mobility. But it's up to them to make those decisions. We're already at that point, and that was the reason why affirmative action needed to be sunsetted. Now, what they're whining about is that, well, wait a minute. Now it's self-determination and that they need to make the proper decisions. But if they don't make the proper decisions, if they want to just waste their money on bitches and hoes and crack, then don't be surprised that your society starts to falter. Is that the fault of reversing affirmative action? Absolutely not. It's because of poor decisions. Now you can see this in New York, where you have minority groups that are making poor decisions, and that is actually devolving the culture of the society by stealing, by pushing people on the subway. New York is starting to install, and I don't think they're going to be that effective, but they're starting to install these gates, these walls, metal walls that you can see through, because it's made out of like a metal mesh for the subway system. You know why they put those on? Because you had a bunch of black kids pushing Asians or pushing white people onto the train system and having the train run them over. That's because of poor ethics, poor raising of these kids. That's a bigger issue that needs to be addressed.
Overwhelmingly affect only one group of people based on race because of who had access. So, because you can't or detangle the two things, right? Socioeconomic background, for the most part, disproportionately affects communities of color in lower socioeconomic.
Now, let's get this straight here. Wait a minute. When the Jews came over to the United States, all right, at first, they didn't get too much help. So they had to be merchants. And then they ended up making money because they were merchants. And then once they had some money, then because they thought generationally, they were investing in their kids for higher education. And those kids ended up being lawyers, getting into politics, becoming doctors, becoming engineers, and becoming productive citizens outside of the mercantile class. Because they thought generationally. It wasn't handed to them. And if anyone thinks it was handed to them, they're not paying attention to history. Same thing with the Irish. Same thing with the Italians. But something's different with the blacks in America? Really? I'm telling you, it's about generational thought.
Economic brackets based on the wealth gap. Like, this is just actual research. So even though, yes, there are anomalies and exceptions, and there's Black excellence and people who are doing really well in the Black community, which I'm extremely proud and happy about, there's still overwhelmingly way too many, based on the proportion of people of color in this country, people that are underserved and don't have just simple access.
But is that because of the morality of the society? I'm telling you, big difference during de Blasio's time as mayor, all the way through Adams. New York has devolved into a shithole. Now, part of that's because of illegal immigration. A big part of that is the legalization of drugs. And there is this inner city rot that's coming out of the Black community that's stealing from businesses. Now, if you think I'm making this up, you can easily Google how Nike and Foot Locker and these, even Macy's, were basically robbed blind when you have this crowd of individuals stealing their merchandise. It's all over the news. There's tons of clips about it. Now, did it happen yesterday? No. But it happens regularly in New York. And it's not just New York. It's happening in Chicago. It's happening in Los Angeles. It's happening at Apple stores. When you have a group of people that don't respect life or property, there's an issue there. There's a big issue there. So don't say it's all about social economic. No, it's the way the kids are raised. Because there are many, many immigrants that came here with literally nothing and built up their family generationally.
Or visibility to opportunities that should be given the same access because they are equally as smart, they are equally as encouraged, they are equally as interested in being a part of a college community. And so I think that race is hard to detangle into, especially if
Really?
you don't,
Really? Is that really true? Is that really true? Okay, let's play this in corporate America. All right, DEI policy pushes in a minority and in a business school, ends up getting a business degree at a good school, maybe even an elite institution, but didn't do as well, let's say, in the coursework. All right, let's say they were mid-range as a student. They go to corporate America, and you have a HR person that has a DEI policy, and they bring in that person into the corporate infrastructure. And that individual is learning the ropes because it's an entry-level position. They're learning the ropes, and then they move up because of DEI policy a little bit faster than the norm. And then they get into management. And so now you have the bitch boss that really doesn't have the skill set to be the boss and makes decisions for the corporation that's actually not beneficial for it. Case in point, look at what happened with Budweiser and Bud Light, where you had the marketing group, which was DEI, that literally destroyed one of the quintessential, most profitable beers in American history because they were promoting bullshit. So just as bright? Really? Just as smart? Really? Just as capable? Really?
address that there is an issue there and just pretend like it's all about socioeconomics because there still are opportunities given to, let's say, you're a poor white person that has a rich uncle, 3 uncles away, he still can call somebody and get you into Harvard.
Oh gosh, I wish I had had that.
But I mean, like, and the people of color might not even have the person connected to the university at all with the legacy admission. When you look at the numbers,
I guarantee you that, yeah, I guarantee you if that other, not this one, but the other newscaster on the Hill, the other talking head, if she went into Harvard, she would end up being on the Hill. All right? Because it's not about the school, it's about the character of the student. It's what's in their soul, it's what's in their constitution. How much grit do you have? And that doesn't come from the school, that comes from the home.
So that's the biggest concern, is to make sure that we're just trying to level out the playing field and not only doing one thing. So what are we adding as well to make sure that it's not just colleges full of rich people's kids?
Yeah, and obviously the problem with like.
Ready to lose the hat and regrow the hair? With sprays by Hims, you can regain your hair and your confidence. Our spray.
And then you get you get into the argument that maybe college isn't very beneficial for the students, and maybe it's better to actually have a skill where it's useful for the society, some sort of building skill, construction skill, the idea of producing something. You know, these paper pushers, I think the sunset of paper pushing is over. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. Get the Boomer Boost. Boomer Boost is a 68 nutrient supplement. What it does is it revs up your metabolism, boosts up your energy levels, helps with your heart health and your vascular system health, helps with brain function, helps with musculature. Take it every day. It's a powder. It has a very comprehensive profile shown on the screen. Read the label on my website. Get the Boomer Boost. Take it every day. Super, super important to take. And what you'll notice is that if you take it for your lunch during breakfast, take it for your lunch or breakfast once a day in soft foods like hummus or yogurt or a smoothie, you'll notice that you're losing weight. Now, if you don't want to lose weight, that's okay. All right. You can still take the Boomer Boost, but there is a way to use Boomer Boost to lose weight. Now, you're going to have a steady level of energy. You're going to help to soak up free radicals. You're going to reduce inflammation. And it's going to target all these different systems. And you're going to have more vitality. You're going to be moving around more. And when you have that, what's going to happen is that you're going to be more vibrant of an individual. Now, if you want energy like Dr. Paul Cottrell, take the Boomer Boost, right? And like I said, if you use that as your breakfast or your lunch in soft foods or a smoothie, guess what? You're going to lose weight safely. And when you maintain that weight loss, especially over a 5 to 7 year period, then you won't be on your yo-yo diet anymore. Heirloom barley, high density protein. You take a scooper a day, mix it with soft foods, filtered water, milk, or even a smoothie. Take it the same way as the Boomer Boost. It will help to detoxify your body, reduce inflammation, and soak up free radicals with superoxide dismutase. And you can also get the Gladiator barley. Gladiator barley does everything that the heirloom barley does, but it has one extra magical benefit. It helps to build muscle. So you do resistance training, you take the Gladiator barley, and voila, you have more muscle. By taking Gladiator barley or heirloom barley and mixing it with the Boomer Boost, you're also helping with your A1C levels. That's the blood glucose levels. Too many people in America have diabetes. I just told you a way to get rid of it. Now, Gladiator barley also stacks really well, not just with Boomer Boost, but with Myotrol. And remember what Myotrol does. Myotrol helps the gene expression to build muscle. So Gladiator barley is the protein to build the muscle, is the building blocks. Myotrol helps with the gene expression to build the muscle, and all the other important nutrients that you need for your body with the Boomer Boost. I just gave you a very powerful supplement stack. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. Use discount 5, you get $5 off any order. And guess what? If you spend $100 or more, you get a free gift until supplies last.
One legacy admissions is that colleges that are mostly privately funded, of course, want the alumni donations coming in. So that's a tricky issue. Of course, they're not going to handicap themselves in the process of doing this, and I'm amenable to that argument. But I hear what you're saying about making sure that people who come from disadvantaged socioeconomic backgrounds get included as well. I consider myself part of that group. And
and what happens? She gets into a good university, maybe not elite, but sub-elite, Ivy League plus, all right? And what does she do? She works for the Hill. See my point? It's not the school. It's the fortitude of the soul. All right. And another really important dynamic that people don't pay attention to. There are many people that have money, and they have these kids, and they're giving them tutors, and they're trying, and they're giving them all this extra curriculars and all this. A lot of those students don't get to the elite institutions, even if they're going to an elite private school for high school. Many of them don't get in, but they don't talk about that. There are many people that are multimillionaires that have kids that are going to elite high schools, elementary schools and high schools, boarding schools, whatever. There are many of them that can't get into the Ivy League. There are more that will go to the Ivy League plus than the Ivy League. So if what they're saying is true, that all it is money, that's not the case. Sometimes you just have dumb kids, even if you're rich.
So benefited greatly from my college education. But I think the beauty, again, of focusing on that aspect of it is that it will capture the fact that Black people have a higher level of being in the lower socioeconomic groups. So you can do that without focusing solely on race.
If that's the case, okay, then why doesn't white boys, why aren't there more white boys in basketball? we want equal rights, right? We want equal opportunity, right? If it's fair for the elite institutions to try to equalize, why aren't there more white boys jumping in basketball?
Issues, I think, is that overall Americans feel that college should be a place for meritocracy. And so if you want to make sure that people have the access to study for the SATs or be in AP classes and do all of those things to get you to the point of going to a high level college, then that's something that we have to start way earlier in life, right? That needs to be done in the K through 12 level to make sure that people are prepared for the college that they're going to, and we're not failing them if they get there and aren't ready for that situation and having lower graduation rates or lower GPAs. Like, let's set them up for success from the beginning.
Well, and and I know we can talk about this forever, but like, if you look at why communities are the way they are, like we just talked about redistricting, that would cut funding for certain neighborhoods or add funding to other neighborhoods. Some of those neighborhoods that disproportionately affected.
Some of it is the funding at the elementary school and high school level. That's true. Some of it is the way the kids are being raised at the home. If you're an inner city kid and your let's say idol is some basketball player that's banging a bunch of bitches and hoes, don't be surprised that your kid wants to bang bitches and hoes and starts talking ghetto and is not doing his calculus homework. So it's about how they're raised at the home.
So this is all things like we talk about local communities, we talk about overcrowding of schools. I went to college in Philadelphia. They had like 50 kids per class sometimes in the worst of times. I remember I had 20 kids maximum in my classes, so I was privileged in that way. Imagine one teacher trying to teach 50 kids. How can you then prepare them at a young age for academic excellence unless they just are naturally brilliant?
That is total bullshit. That's total bullshit. Let me give you an example. The baby boom generation, in general, when they came out of high school, was smarter than the average high schooler today. All right? The baby boom generation had lots of kids. That's why they were called the baby boom generation. And their classes were large. And guess what? They performed better. What's the difference? Ethics.
Children, we learn. And so these are all things that are like effective. And then if your parents have the time to get you and resources to get you a tutor, that helps. If they don't and you're falling behind for natural reasons because you like to play too much in class, then you just fall behind, especially if your parents are working 2 jobs trying to make the American dream happen. There's so many, I think, instances that make this not a level playing field from the jump, that we would have to make sure that every single district and every single community is all having the same access to the proper teachers, resources, and funding in order for that to work, which would be sort of the society, or actually anti everything that's happening in society right now. We allow states to decide what they're doing, local communities to get voted in, and all these things to happen. And then naturally, somebody ends up suffering. Some communities are better based on who's wealthier to pay the better taxes and then get the roads paved so you can easily get to school without a flat tire, et cetera, et cetera. So it's like this endless, windy road of like, how do you get to the beginning level where all students have a proper education in this country to prepare for colleges?
There's a lot of factors. That's no joke there. All right, up next, Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene has a warning for Fox News and is blasting Mark.
So let's say, okay, so if you go to Georgetown and you're first to go to college in your family, first generation, that's what you get. You become a talking head on the Hill. That's not productive for society. It really isn't. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the C60. Why? Because it's the most potent antioxidant that you can buy. Now, what it's going to do is it's going to soak up free radicals. It's going to help to reduce the stress in the cell, in your neurons, soak up free radicals at the vascular level. That's going to help with your cardiovascular health. It's going to help with the endocrine system and the immune system. And guess what? You can get it in MCT coconut oil. avocado oil, and extra virgin olive oil. Now, what C60 does is it's going to soak up free radicals at about hundreds of times, if not 1,000 times more than vitamin C. You can't take enough vitamin C to equal C60. You take a teaspoon a day. Teaspoon a day, preferably on an empty stomach for best absorption. C60 is a 60 carbon molecule that has to be in an oil. That's why it's in different oils. And you absorb it, and what's going to happen is in your cells and in your vascular system and in your neurons, you're going to reduce that stress. It's going to soak up those free radicals, and the ATP is going to go up because your mitochondria and your cells are going to improve. The health of those mitochondria will improve. Now, when you have this happen in your neural at the neuron level, you have lots of ATP to have energy to create neurotransmitters. But when you age, your mitochondria starts to age and not perform as well, and it's not producing as much ATP. This is the reason why your cellular metabolism goes down when you get older, because your mitochondria sucks. So if you soak up free radicals that are building up as you're getting older, you're improving the performance of your cells and your neurons. So for your neurons, when you improve your mitochondria and you have more ATP, they fire more because you have more neurotransmitters. Less stress in the cell means healthier myelin sheath. Less inflammation at the brain level, less issues with the myelin sheath. So you're going to have that connection and that communication between neurons. So you're thinking better. Your memory improves. Your kinematics improve because of your cerebellum is healthier. And when you couple that with a holistic approach, proper diet and exercise, eating non-processed foods, drinking filtered water, having mindfulness, learning new things. If you look at this from a holistic perspective, then your body is healing. And over time, you're going to see that your body is slowing down its aging. Now, I'm in my 50s. I don't look like I'm 50. I'm older than Alex Jones. I am much more fit and look a lot younger than Alex Jones. Now, why is that? Because of my protocol. Now, part of my protocol is taking C60 every day, a teaspoon a day. Preferably, like I said, on an empty stomach. If you work out, take it before you work out. It's going to soak up the free radicals during your workout, and you'll recover quicker. Now, I've told you a lot of little secrets on how to improve your health. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. Use discount 5. You get $5 off any order. You spend $100 or more, you get a free gift. Thank you for listening. That's the end of my show. It lasted for more than 2 hours, maybe closer to 3. And don't buy the bullshit. Don't fall into the trap of what is in the news. You got to step back and go, well, wait a minute here. What's making sense? Why didn't she turn into an engineer? Why didn't she become a female engineer instead of a female talking head? It's easy to be a talking head. It's not that easy to actually build something, design something. All right? Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. Help support the work that I do. Thank you for listening, and have a nice day.